Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Back in 2002, I was in my undergrad years, grinding through endless nights of studying, barely holding on before final exams. My dorm was co-ed, which had its perks, one of them being that I could spend time in my girlfriend's room whenever I wanted. The night before one of our hardest exams, I was in her room, drowning in notes and textbooks, trying to push through the fatigue and get everything to stick in my head. It was around 2 a.m. when she finally gave in to exhaustion and crawled into bed. I wasn't ready to quit yet. I told her I'd study a bit longer, and she mumbled something before turning over and pulling the blanket over her head. I kept at it for another 2 hours, my mind running through formulas, concepts, and past exam questions. The dorm was mostly silent at this point, save for the occasional creak of the old building and the distant hum of someone's TV left on in another room. By 4 a.m., I was done. My brain was fried, and I knew I wouldn't retain anything more. The thought of heading back to my own room crossed my mind, but it was 4 floors down, at the very end of the hallway. The idea of lugging all my books and notes back wasn't appealing, and I figured I could just crash here. The only problem was that my girlfriend's bed was tiny, barely enough for her, let alone both of us. It was also covered with soft toys, pillows, and random things she liked to keep close. There was no way I could squeeze in without disturbing her. So I grabbed my sleeping bag, rolled it out on the floor next to her bed, and lay down. The position wasn't the most comfortable, but I was too tired to care. I faced her as I tried to fall asleep, my back to the door of the room. The room was dimly lit by the faint glow of the streetlights seeping through the curtains. The air was still, and the only sound was the occasional shift of the building settling. I lay there, staring at her, my mind still half filled with thoughts of the exam. The seconds ticked by slowly, and my eyelids grew heavier. Then, just as I was drifting off, something happened that I still can't explain. Without any warning, she suddenly sat up. It wasn't a slow, groggy movement like when someone wakes up from a dream. It was a rapid, almost mechanical motion, as if she had been yanked into position by invisible strings. Her torso was at a perfect 90-degree angle to her legs, her arms stretched wide apart, straight to her sides. The pose was unnerving, like something out of a painting or a religious depiction. I remember thinking that it looked disturbingly similar to a crucifixion pose, except she was sitting upright. Then she spoke, or rather, she blurted out something in a language I didn't understand. The words came fast, a stream of syllables that meant nothing to me. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I had ever heard her speak before. It wasn't even close to the few other languages I knew she understood. The sound was strange, like a whisper and a chant mixed together, yet forceful, as if she was commanding something. It lasted no more than 5 seconds. And just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. She fell back onto the bed, her body limp, her breathing slow and steady as if nothing had happened. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. My body was rigid, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe she was talking in her sleep. Maybe it was just some bizarre sleep disorder. But the way she moved, the way she sat up so unnaturally fast, as if some unseen force had lifted her, it didn't feel right. I lay there, staring at her. She looked peaceful, completely unaware of what had just occurred. I considered waking her up, shaking her, asking her what the hell just happened. But a strange, primal fear gripped me. Something in me told me not to disturb her, not to acknowledge whatever had just transpired. I turned over, facing the ceiling, my mind racing. Sleep felt impossible now. I told myself over and over that it was nothing, that I was just overtired, that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I stayed there, eyes open, listening to every sound in the room, every shift of the air, every creak of the walls. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but it must have been hours later because when I woke up, the room was filled with the pale light of morning. She was already up, moving around as if nothing had happened. She greeted me casually, stretching and yawning, completely unaware that something had been deeply wrong just a few hours ago. I hesitated, then decided to tell her. I described everything I saw, how she sat up, the way she held her arms, the strange words she spoke. I half expected her to laugh, to tell me I was messing with her. But instead, she just frowned. "I don't remember anything," she said, shaking her head. "Are you sure?" Yes, I was sure. More sure than anything. I could still see it perfectly in my mind, hear the words, feel the cold that had crept into my bones as it happened. She brushed it off, saying she must have been dreaming, that I was probably just seeing things in my tired state. And that was the end of it for her. She never brought it up again. She never had another episode like that. Not in the months we stayed together after. Not once before we eventually parted ways. But I never forgot. Even now, decades later, I remember that night with absolute clarity. I've told the story to a handful of people over the years, and I always get the same response. Suggestions that it was sleep paralysis, or night terrors, or some kind of subconscious stress reaction. Maybe it was. Maybe there's a rational explanation that I just don't know. But something about it still doesn't sit right with me. The way she moved, the way she spoke, there was something inhuman about it. Something I don't think I'll ever understand. I never found out what it was. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was late, about 3 in the morning. The air outside was cold enough to make me pull my hoodie a little tighter around me as I stepped out of my apartment. I didn't like to sleep. I never had, not since my sleep paralysis got so bad. It wasn't worth it anymore. The gas station down the road had become a second home of sorts. I went there almost every night, picking up smokes and a drink, maybe an energy drink, since I'd be up for the next several hours anyway. The guy who worked the graveyard shift was the only person I really talked to. We had that in common. Neither of us were particularly social. He wasn't the kind of guy to chat with just anyone, and I sure as hell wasn't either. My social anxiety was bad. But over time, we'd started talking, mostly about gaming, sometimes just about whatever dumb shit came to mind at 3 in the morning. The streets were empty as I walked. It was close to Halloween, and this town had a college nearby, so it wasn't weird to see people in costumes or masks even this late. I'd gotten used to it. I reached the gas station and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, too bright compared to the dark outside. The clerk gave me a nod, and I gave him one back as I made my way to the fridge in the back. I grabbed my usual drink, then headed to the counter for a pack of smokes. We started talking like usual, just passing the time. The store was dead at this hour, just the way we liked it. No one in line, no small talk with strangers, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional beep from the register. Then the door swung open. I glanced over, expecting another late-night customer, maybe a drunk college kid grabbing snacks. But something fell off. The guy who walked in had his hood up and a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. That alone wasn't weird. It was close to Halloween, after all. But then I saw it, just for a second, a glint of something metallic in his hand. It didn't register at first. My tired brain barely even processed it. And then he had the gun pointed at my head. Everything stopped. The air in the room got thick, like the whole world had just slowed down. My heart felt like it had stopped, but I could hear it pounding in my ears. The clerk and I both froze. The guy didn't say anything at first, just motioned with the gun. The clerk and I raised our hands and stepped back behind the counter. The guy's voice was rough when he finally spoke. He told the clerk to empty the register. No bullshit, no hesitation. Just do it. The clerk's hands were shaking as he started pulling out the cash, stuffing it into a plastic bag the guy had brought. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do, if I should say something, if I should just keep staring at the gun, at his hands, at his eyes, which were the only part of his face I could see. They were wild, darting around, probably looking for security cameras, exits, anyone who might come in and ruin this for him. Then he turned to me. "Empty your pockets," he said. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I reached into my hoodie pocket. I pulled out my phone, my keys, a couple crumpled dollar bills, and dropped them onto the floor like he told me to. He grabbed my phone, but didn't even look at my wallet. Didn't even ask for it. I don't know why. Maybe he thought I didn't have any cash. Maybe he was just in a hurry. Maybe he was stupid. I don't know. Then he motioned with the gun again. "Both of you. Bathroom." Now, this was it. This was where I was going to die. I could feel it. I could hear it in my head, see it happening before it even happened. The news articles, the headlines. 2 found dead in gas station robbery. My legs felt like they weren't working right as we shuffled to the back, to the small, dingy employee bathroom. The guy shoved us inside and slammed the door shut. Silence. Neither of us moved. We didn't say anything. Just stood there in the dark, breathing heavy, listening. I was waiting for a gunshot, for footsteps, for something. But nothing came. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard the bell above the door ring as it swung open. He was gone. I didn't move for another minute. I was sure he was still out there, waiting for us to come out so he could finish whatever he started. But finally, the clerk reached for his phone and called the cops. I barely registered what he was saying, just stood there, staring at the floor, at the dirty tile beneath me. My hands were still shaking. When we finally stepped out, the store looked the same. Nothing was trashed. Nothing was broken. The only sign that anything had happened was the open register, the missing cash, and the cigarettes. They were scattered near the door. A whole pack, maybe more. Like he had them in his hand, but dropped them on his way out. And just beyond that, in the parking lot, was my phone. He had taken it, but somewhere between locking us up and running, he dropped it. Maybe he was in a hurry. Maybe he was just stupid. Either way, it was there, right in the middle of the lot, face down on the pavement. I picked it up with shaky hands. The screen was cracked, but it still turned on. The cops showed up not long after. We told them everything. They checked the cameras, took our statements, but I already knew how this was going to go. I'd seen enough stories like this to know they weren't going to find him. And they didn't. That was it. No arrests. No follow-ups. Just another robbery, another night, another guy with a gun who got away. The only thing he really walked away with was the cash. He had nothing else to show for it. He could have killed us. He could have taken more. But he didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I barely even went back to my apartment. I just sat there outside the gas station, staring at the pavement, thinking about how close that was, how easily it could have ended differently. I still go to that gas station. Still see the same clerk. We don't talk about it much. It's just something that happened. Another night shift. Another late night run. But I never walk in there without looking over my shoulder first. Summer was thick in the air, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made everything feel just a little heavier. The kind of heat where even the nights didn't cool down the way they should. I was home from school, hanging around with friends, doing the things kids do when they've got nothing but time. That summer, something was different. Fires had started popping up around town, small ones at first, but then they got worse. Fields, sheds, even an abandoned house on the edge of town. Our town was small, and so was our fire department. They did what they could, but you could tell they were stretched thin. One of the older firemen, Bill Harris, was well known. He had been with the department for decades, always the first to a call, always willing to help. When the fires started, people assumed it was some careless accident, maybe kids playing with fireworks. But then it kept happening. People started locking up their sheds, keeping their hoses close. The fire department was responding constantly, and Bill was almost always there. Then one day, he was gone. It was in the middle of all the chaos, just another fire, nothing bigger than the rest, but Bill never came back. They searched for him, combed the town, the fields, the roads, but he had vanished. No car, no body, nothing. It didn't make sense. Some thought maybe he got lost, maybe he had an accident, but others whispered darker things. His family was left with nothing but unanswered questions, and the fires stopped just as suddenly as they had started. Months passed. Summer faded into fall, and then winter settled in, hard and cold the way it always did. By then, people had mostly moved on, or at least stopped talking about it. The fires were old news, and Bill was just another town mystery, the kind people told at the bar over a beer, shaking their heads. Then my friend found him. It was one of those deep winter days when everything was frozen solid, the air so cold it hurt to breathe. My friend, Mike, was out on his snowmobile, riding through the fields behind his family's acreage, a place we had all explored as kids. He was flying across the snow when he suddenly lost traction, the machine jerking in a way that didn't make sense. He stopped, got off to check what happened, and saw it, scraps of cloth tangled in the treads. Curious, he backtracked, following his own trail, trying to figure out what he had hit. And then he saw the body. It was half buried in the snow, frozen solid, but there was no mistaking what it was. The shape, the clothes, he knew immediately. It was Bill. Mike ran. He ran all the way home, didn't stop until he burst through the door, shaking so hard he could barely get the words out. His parents called the police, and then, against their protests, he went back out. He told me later he couldn't just leave Bill out there alone, not after all this time. So he sat there, in the freezing cold, waiting for the authorities to come. The investigation was long, and the truth was worse than anything we had imagined. They found out that the fires had been set on purpose, not by some reckless kids, but by a man who had been struggling with something deep and twisted in his mind. He had some grudge against Bill, though no one could ever quite figure out why. His plan had been sickeningly simple: light enough fires, stretch the department thin, and eventually Bill would be alone. And he was. Somewhere out there, in the chaos of all those calls, Bill had gone out to a fire by himself. And that's where the man had been waiting, with a shotgun. He had shot Bill, taken his body, and moved it out to that field. Then winter had come, snow and ice sealing everything in place. It had been out there all along, waiting for someone to find it. After that, things changed. There was a trial. The man was locked away, but it didn't bring Bill back. His family got answers, but not the kind that gave peace. And Mike, he was different. He wasn't crazy or anything like that, but something in him shifted. He didn't laugh as easily, didn't goof around the way he used to. He had seen something no one should have to see, and it stayed with him. I think about that summer sometimes, about the heat, the fires, the way we never saw it coming. How one person's darkness can creep into a town, change it forever. It doesn't leave, not really. Even now, years later, I can still see the way Mike looked when he told me the story, his voice quieter than it used to be. We all moved on, but some things don't go away. Not completely. I used to live in a hotel in Norway for 3.5 years. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was comfortable, and over time, it felt more like home than just a place to stay. Hotels always have stories, little tales passed between staff members, whispered among guests who stay too long or listen too closely. Some are just stories, ways to pass time during a slow shift. Others feel different. I never put much weight on them, though. Not until I stayed in that room. It was on the 5th floor, not too far from the elevator, but far enough down the hall that it stayed quiet most of the time. I had been given the room without any warning, no knowing glance from the receptionist, no offhand comments about what others had experienced there. It was just another room, as far as I was concerned. During the day, the hotel was full of the usual background noise. People coming and going, muffled conversations from the hall, the sound of doors opening and closing. Normal things. But in that room, there was something else. It started with a sound, a child crying. It was faint, but clear, coming from the direction of the bathroom. The first time I heard it, I dismissed it immediately. Old buildings have quirks, and sound travels in strange ways. I had lived in enough places to know how pipes can carry voices from one floor to another. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a child was staying in a room below mine. Maybe someone was watching TV, and the sound was leaking through the walls. It didn't seem strange in the moment. I barely noticed it, but it kept happening. Every time I was in the room during the day, the crying would start up, always distant, always from the bathroom. Sometimes it was barely noticeable, more of a feeling than a sound. Other times, it was as though the child was right there, just behind the closed door. I ignored it as best as I could. Then came the night. I woke up suddenly, disoriented in the dark. It took me a moment to realize why. The crying was still there, still coming from the bathroom. But now, in the silence of the night, it was different. More distinct, more present. The same voice, the same intensity as before. There was no mistaking where it was coming from. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The sound wasn't muffled or distant anymore. It wasn't something I could dismiss as coming from another room or traveling through the pipes. It was in my room. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The sound rose and fell, a steady, rhythmic crying that never wavered. It was unsettling in a way I couldn't quite describe. I wasn't afraid, not exactly. It was more of a deep, uneasy feeling in my chest, like something wasn't quite right. Like something was happening that shouldn't be. After what felt like forever, I sat up. The crying didn't stop. I told myself it was the pipes, that there was a logical explanation. But the moment I stepped toward the bathroom, the sound faded. Not all at once, but gradually, like it was being pulled away. The bathroom was empty. No open windows, no vents that could explain it. Just the same tiled walls, the same sink, the same shower. Nothing was out of place. I stood there for a long time, listening to nothing, before finally going back to bed. The next day, I went to the front desk. I wasn't looking for an explanation, not really. I just wanted to confirm what I already believed, that there was a child staying in the room below mine, and that the sound had traveled through the building. The receptionist listened patiently before shaking her head. There were no children staying in the hotel that night. I felt a strange, sinking feeling in my stomach, but I pressed on, asking about the pipes, about how sound traveled in the building. She shook her head again. The pipes weren't connected in that way. There was no reason I should have heard anything from another room. Then, after a pause, she told me something else. The room I had stayed in was known to be haunted. People had reported strange noises before, unexplained sounds in the middle of the night. Some left after just one night. Others refused to stay there again. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't a ghost story, not really. Just something unexplainable, something I had experienced firsthand, but still didn't fully understand. I stayed in the hotel for a long time after that, but I never stayed in that room again. I never heard the crying from any other part of the building, never experienced anything like it in any of the other rooms I stayed in. But every time I walked past that door, I couldn't help but listen, just for a second, just in case. I never heard it again, but that didn't make it any less real. We had been on the road for hours, coming back from somewhere out of town. I can't even remember where exactly, just that we were all tired, restless, and eager to be home. It was me, my ex, and a couple of friends packed into my car, cruising down a mostly empty interstate late at night. The hum of the road was almost hypnotic, and the dark landscape stretched out endlessly on both sides. At some point, someone in the car mentioned needing a bathroom break. We hadn't seen an open gas station in a while, and options were limited. Eventually, we spotted a station on the side of the road, completely dark except for a flickering light above the pump area. It was obviously closed, but there was a chance the outside restrooms were still open. We didn't have many other choices, so I pulled in. The place was unsettling, to say the least. No cars in the lot. No signs of life. The gas station sat alone, surrounded by fields and scattered trees, at least a mile away from the nearest exit. The convenience store's windows were dark, covered in grime, and the pumps looked like they hadn't been used in years. I pulled around to the back where the restrooms usually were. That's when we saw him. A man stood there, wearing a respirator and goggles, his face completely obscured. His clothes were filthy, stained with who knows what, and he wore yellow dishwashing gloves that looked out of place. He wasn't near a car. There was no vehicle anywhere in sight. Instead, he was pushing a shopping cart, which appeared to be about half full of random junk. I couldn't make out exactly what was in it, but the sight alone made my stomach drop. As soon as our headlights hit him, he froze. Then, without hesitation, he abandoned the cart and sprinted toward us at full speed. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. My instincts screamed at me to get the hell out of there. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching against the cracked pavement as we bolted. In the rearview mirror, I saw him still running after us, arms pumping violently, not slowing down. His respirator bobbed with each step. I don't know how long he chased us, but eventually, he was swallowed by the darkness as we sped away. The car was dead silent. No one spoke. No one needed to. The feeling of pure, unfiltered dread hung thick in the air. I don't know who that guy was, or what he was doing out there, but everything about him felt wrong. His appearance, his reaction to us, the way he ran toward the car like he had every intention of catching us. What would have happened if we had been slower? If the car had stalled? I didn't want to think about it. We didn't stop again until we were back in town. Even then, I barely remember the drive home. It felt like I had been holding my breath the entire way. When I finally parked, we all just sat there for a moment, still trying to process what had just happened. My ex eventually broke the silence, muttering something about how messed up that was. No one disagreed. I never figured out what that man was doing there. He had no car, no reason to be at a closed gas station in the middle of nowhere. The whole thing made my skin crawl in a way I can't explain. It wasn't just the way he looked, it was the feeling, that gut-level instinct that something was terribly, deeply wrong. That we had come way too close to something we weren't supposed to see. That wasn't the only time my ex ended up in the middle of something disturbing. A while after that, she went to a Braves game in Atlanta with her sister and her sister's boyfriend. I wasn't there, but she told me what happened afterward. They had taken a wrong turn leaving the stadium, ending up in a rough part of town late at night. The streets were mostly empty, but as they pulled onto a one-way road, they saw something happening right in front of them. A group of people was beating a man in the middle of the street. Not just punching him, kicking, stomping, hitting him with bats. It was brutal, animalistic. My ex and the others just sat there in the car, doors locked, watching in horror. They didn't know what to do. It all happened so fast, and they were too scared to move, too scared to even breathe too loudly. The attackers didn't even acknowledge them. It was like they weren't even there, like the beating was the only thing that existed to them in that moment. My ex said the way they moved, the way they acted, it was like they weren't human. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The group scattered, disappearing into the shadows. The man on the ground wasn't moving. They didn't know if he was dead or alive, but from the way he lay there, twisted and limp, it didn't look good. My ex was frozen, shaking, unable to process what she had just seen. She took a picture. I don't know why. Maybe she thought no one would believe her otherwise. Maybe it was shock, or some kind of instinct to document the horror in front of her. She sent it to me with no context, just the image of that dark street, the lifeless-looking body, the attackers still lingering in the background. I stared at that picture for a long time. It didn't feel real, but it was. When she finally got home, she was still in shock. She barely spoke about it. None of them did. What was there to say? It wasn't like a movie, where the good guys show up at the last second to stop the bad guys. It was just real, raw violence. And no one did anything. No one could do anything. I think about both of those nights more often than I'd like. The man at the gas station. The brutal beating in the street. Different places, different people, but the same feeling. That same gut-wrenching sense that something was deeply, horribly wrong. That sense of helplessness, of seeing something you weren't meant to see. And worst of all, the realization that the world is a lot darker, a lot scarier than we like to believe. Sometimes, I wonder what happened to that man in the street. If he survived, if he got help, or if his body was just left there until someone else found it. And sometimes, I wonder about the man at the gas station. Who he was, what he wanted, what he would have done if I had stopped the car instead of speeding away. I don't think I'll ever get answers. And maybe that's for the best. When I was 12, I had my first real scare. Not just a creepy feeling or a shadow moving weirdly in the dark, an actual, heart-pounding, stomach-dropping moment that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I was home alone, which wasn't unusual. My parents trusted me, and I had my golden doodle, Bentley, to keep me company. He was the kind of dog that never left my side, always trotting after me, curling up next to me whenever I sat down. It made being alone feel less alone. That day, I had been hanging out in the basement, playing video games. Our basement wasn't anything fancy, just a big open space with a couch, a TV, and a few shelves stacked with old board games and boxes full of who knows what. We had these double doors down there that led to a storage room. They were heavy, and they made a very distinct sound when they shut, kind of a deep, echoing clunk that you could hear throughout the house. I remembered leaving them open because I had grabbed something from inside earlier and didn't see the point in closing them. After a while, I got bored of gaming and went upstairs to watch TV in the living room. Bentley followed, plopping down next to the couch like he always did. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't really notice until something disrupts it. That something came in the form of a sudden, loud noise. The unmistakable sound of the basement double doors slamming shut. It was so sharp, so final, that my stomach immediately twisted into a knot. My first thought was that maybe a draft had pushed them closed, but that didn't make sense. There were no open windows down there, and those doors were heavy. They didn't just move on their own. I sat there for a few seconds, frozen, ears straining for any other sound. Bentley lifted his head, ears perked up. He heard it too. He wasn't barking, but he was staring towards the basement stairs, completely still. Curiosity got the better of me. It always does. I should have just called my mom right then, but my 12-year-old brain didn't think that far ahead. I wanted to know what had happened. I went to the hallway where the basement door was, Bentley following close behind. My heart was hammering, but I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe something fell. Maybe the house settled weirdly. Maybe I was overreacting. Slowly, I crept around the corner and peered down the basement stairs. The doors were closed. I hadn't imagined it. My hands felt clammy, but I forced myself to breathe. If something was down there, Bentley would be barking his head off, right? He wasn't. He was just standing next to me, ears forward, tail stiff. I needed something to defend myself, even if it was just for the sake of feeling braver. My airsoft gun was in my room, so I grabbed it before heading back to the basement door. It wasn't much, but in the moment, it made me feel better. Step by step, I started down the stairs, Bentley right next to me. The house felt too quiet, like even the air had stopped moving. I reached the bottom, took a deep breath, and kicked open the double doors. They swung open violently, slamming against the walls. Bentley bolted inside, sniffing like crazy. I stayed by the doorframe, watching him. 30 seconds passed. A minute. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He was just sniffing, pacing a little, his tail still stiff but not raised in alarm. I stepped inside. My heart was still hammering, but nothing seemed out of place. The storage room was just the same as always. Shelves filled with random junk, an old workbench covered in dust, boxes stacked in the corner. Nothing looked disturbed. And then I saw it. In the far back of the basement, there was a large window, one of those ground-level ones that let in a little bit of light. It had a metal ladder leading up to the outside. Normally, that window was shut and locked. It was wide open. The air left my lungs. My skin went cold. I stared at the window, my mind racing. Someone had been in my house. Maybe they still were. Bentley was sniffing near the window now, his tail moving slightly. If there had been someone, they were gone. They had left. But how long ago? Had they been watching me while I was playing video games? Were they hiding in the basement while I was upstairs? My hands were shaking. I backed out of the storage room, gripping my airsoft gun like it could actually help me. I didn't care if the person was already gone. I wasn't about to take any chances. I ran up the stairs, Bentley right behind me, and slammed the basement door shut. I grabbed my phone and called my mom. My voice was shaking as I told her what happened. She didn't hesitate. She told me to stay put and called the police. The next hour was a blur. The police arrived quickly, checked the house, and confirmed what I already knew. The intruder was gone. They found scuff marks on the wall beneath the window, dirt on the floor near it. Someone had definitely come in through there. They searched the house, but nothing seemed to be missing. Nothing was out of place. It was like whoever had broken and hadn't been looking for valuables. Maybe they thought the house was empty and panicked when they heard me. Maybe they were just watching. That thought still haunts me. My parents had security cameras installed the next week. Motion detectors. Better locks. I never stayed home alone after that, at least not for a long time. I still wonder about that night. Who it was, what they wanted. If they had been inside the basement, watching me the whole time. I'll never know. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. We moved into the house when I was in 5th grade. It had been an unusual find, sitting on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty fields and neighboring properties that seemed to carry their own air of unease. The man who had owned the house before us hadn't wanted to leave. My parents told me later that he had fought the sale every step of the way, dragging his feet on paperwork, making last-minute demands, and generally making the whole process a nightmare. He had to move because his wife had inherited another home, and that seemed to be the only reason he had finally agreed to sell. The last few days before we took possession of the house, my parents had asked him to clear out the mess upstairs. The second floor was unfinished, with nothing but stud walls and bits of insulation, broken wood, and random debris scattered across the floor. When my older brother came by to check on the place before move-in day, he found the man in the backyard, burning the little bits of sheetrock and insulation that had been up there, tearing them off the walls by hand, and throwing them into the fire. It seemed like an act of defiance, and later, we found out he had shoved human feces down the air vents. My parents never forgave him for that. From the moment we moved in, I hated the house. It was noisy in a way that never felt normal. I remember my mom calling out in frustration from the other room, thinking she had heard something heavy fall and shatter, only to rush in and find nothing disturbed. I had been standing right next to her one of those times, and I know she wasn't imagining it. She wasn't the kind of person to make up stories, and she had no reason to. At night, I woke up constantly. It was almost always around 2 or 3 in the morning. I would hear footsteps moving through the house, slow and deliberate, and I would lie frozen in my bed, convinced a burglar had broken in. My room was situated at a corner, with one wall against the living room and the other facing the entrance to the house. It meant I could hear everything. My parents always told me it was just the house settling or the dog walking around. I told myself the same thing, until one night I decided to test the theory. I snuck the dog into my room and shut the door, letting him sleep at the foot of my bed. I still woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. When we finally finished the upstairs, the room arrangements changed. My brother moved into my parents' old room, and my parents took the new space upstairs. I moved into my brother's old room, directly beneath the living room. The living room had originally been the unfinished space that the previous owner had ripped apart before we moved in. If anything, the sounds got worse after the renovation. I convinced myself it was still the dog, or maybe my parents, but deep down I knew better. Things calmed down for a while, or maybe I just got used to them. Then one night, right before a trip I had been looking forward to for months, I woke up again. This time, it was around 4 in the morning. At first, I heard what sounded like a faint hissing, just above the gentle bubbling of my aquarium. I told myself it was just the water level being too low, that I needed to top it off in the morning. But the sound got louder. It turned into whispers. I told myself I was being ridiculous. My mind was playing tricks on me, filling in the gaps of a noise I couldn't quite place. But the whispers grew clearer, distinct. I could pick out words. She and it. 2 people talking, murmuring. Just around the corner, at the base of the stairway that led upstairs. The layout of our house had changed when we finished the 2nd floor, but the stairs had always been positioned against the back wall of the living room. Originally, there had been a door leading to them, but when we remodeled, it had been turned into an archway. The stairwell itself was narrow and dark, even during the day. At night, it was nothing but a black void. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I tried to convince myself that my parents were just talking upstairs, but I knew their voices. These weren't theirs. I glanced toward my bedroom door, cracked open just enough for me to see the dim glow of the night light in the hallway. The whispering continued, soft and urgent, as if whoever was speaking didn't want to be heard, but couldn't help themselves. I wanted to be brave. I was almost in 8th grade, after all. I had spent years watching Star Trek and imagining myself as some kind of hero, someone who wouldn't back down from fear. I took a deep breath and swung my legs over the side of the bed. Slowly, I crept to the door, my feet silent against the floor. The whispering didn't stop. If anything, it got a little louder. As I stepped into the hallway, my dog lifted his head from his bed in the living room and looked at me. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just watched me. I took a few more steps, my body tense, my hands shaking. The whispers were coming from just beyond the archway. I reached the living room and hesitated. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. The dog stood up and padded over to me, pressing his head against my leg. I knelt down and held onto him, trying to steady myself. The voices continued. Finally, I forced myself to move. I stepped toward the stairway and turned the corner, expecting, I don't know what. Silence. The stairwell was empty. The whispering had stopped so suddenly that it was almost worse than hearing it. My skin crawled as I stared into the blackness of the stairs. I wanted to run back to my room, but my pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I sat down at the top of the stairs, my back against the wall, and stayed there until morning. My mom found me there and asked what I was doing. I told her I had trouble sleeping. I didn't tell her the truth. It wasn't the last strange thing that happened in that house. The neighborhood itself carried an air of decay. A horse in the field next door died suddenly and horribly, and its owner spiraled into something dark and broken. The house on the other side of ours had a reputation for ruining marriages. Every couple that moved in divorced within a year. The old farmhouse just beyond my bedroom window never kept tenants for more than a few months. Eventually, it just sat empty. I never liked walking past it. More than once, I snuck out at night and cut through the backyard of the abandoned house, only to find finger-shaped bruises on my arms and legs the next morning. I told myself I must have bumped into something, but the marks were always in the same shape, the same pattern. I had been growled at while waiting for the bus in the early morning darkness, a voice right behind me telling me to go. My mom had seen a shadow walk down the hallway and descend the stairs in the middle of the night, only to find no one there. I don't have answers for any of it. I don't want to. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents do. Sometimes, I wonder if they still hear things at night. If they do, they've never told me. I had been home alone for nearly a week by then. 6 days of no human interaction, just me in my apartment, doing nothing but wasting time. I had barely eaten anything decent, mostly snacks and whatever was left in the fridge, but by that night, even those were gone. I wasn't in the mood to cook, not that I had anything to cook with, and ordering food at that hour was a hassle. So, I decided to drive to the McDonald's drive-thru a few miles away. It was 2 a.m., a time when the city usually had some life. The commercial district where the McDonald's was located was always buzzing at night, full of clubs, bars, a cinema, go-karts, and at least 500 different stores in those big shopping halls. On any given night, the area was bright, packed with people who had nowhere better to be. But that night, it was dead. I noticed it as soon as I turned onto the main road leading to the area. Every single streetlight was off. It wasn't just dark, it was black. It felt wrong. I had driven through there at night before, and I had never seen it like that. Even on the slowest days, there were always a few people around, a few cars, maybe a cab waiting for drunk passengers outside a bar. But that night, it was just me. No neon signs, no music spilling from club doors, just a vast empty stretch of asphalt and darkened buildings. It was unsettling, but I tried to shake the feeling. I kept my focus on the road, my mind occupied with the thought of food. As I drove through the open space between the stores, something in the distance caught my eye. A figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was just someone walking home, but something about the way he stood, still, hunched, barely visible in the dark, sent a wave of unease through me. He wasn't moving much, and I could barely make out his shape against the surrounding darkness. I flipped my headlights to high beam, and that's when I saw him clearly. He was slowly shuffling toward my car. A man, dressed in a dark tracksuit and a white sweater, his face barely visible beneath the hood. His entire posture was off. His head was tilted slightly forward, his shoulders slouched, and he dragged his feet in a way that immediately reminded me of something out of a horror movie. Then I saw the blood. Dark stains covered his sweater, centered around his stomach, seeping through the fabric. Blood ran down his mouth, dripping onto the road in front of him. His left arm clutched his side, pressing against what looked like a deep stab wound. I hit the brakes, my hands tightening around the wheel. The car was locked, I was safe inside, but the sheer sight of him made my heart race. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to just drive past him and get out of there, but another part of me hesitated. What if he needed help? What if he had been attacked, mugged, left to die? I lowered my window just a few centimeters, just enough to hear him if he spoke, but not enough for him to reach inside. My other hand hovered over my phone, ready to dial emergency services. My foot stayed on the clutch, the car still in first gear. I wasn't taking any chances. He reached the driver's side and leaned against my car, his bloody hand pressing against the window. His breathing was heavy, ragged. Then he spoke. I barely understood him at first. His voice was rough, his accent thick, but I caught the words. He was telling me to drive. Not asking, telling. He wanted me to take him across town, to one of the worst parts of the city. My stomach dropped. I hesitated for only a moment. Then instinct took over. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped off. His hand slid down the glass, leaving a thick smear of blood. I didn't look back. I didn't care where he went or what happened to him. I just needed to get away. By the time I reached the McDonald's parking lot, my hands were shaking. My mind was a mess, running through everything that had just happened. What if he had a weapon? What if I had let him in? What if I had waited just a second longer? I stepped out of my car and started wiping the blood off the window with wet paper towels. The smears weren't coming off easily. Small droplets had splattered onto the door handle and the side mirror. I kept wiping, my hands moving automatically, my thoughts still racing. I considered calling the police. I knew I should have. But here, making a call like that only brought more trouble. Even if I called anonymously, it wouldn't have made much of a difference. They wouldn't have done anything. They never did. As I stood there, tossing another stained paper towel onto the ground, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. He was there, a few dozen meters away, near the bus stop. Still walking, still moving like he was half dead. I froze, my body tensed, my breath catching in my throat. How did he get there so fast? There were no shortcuts, no side streets. I had sped off. I had left him behind. But there he was. He didn't seem to notice me. He just stood there, waiting, swaying slightly on his feet. The same slow, unsteady movements. Minutes passed. 5, maybe 10. Then finally a cab pulled up. The driver didn't hesitate. The man opened the door and got in. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. The taxi drove off, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty road where he had been. My heart was still pounding. I wanted to believe he was just a drunk, a junkie, someone who got into a fight and needed to get home. But something about it didn't sit right. Something about the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he just appeared again at the bus stop. It wasn't normal. I finished cleaning my car, got back inside, and drove home, my mind still spinning. I locked every door, every window, sat on my couch, and stared at the wall, trying to process everything. I didn't sleep that night. A week has passed since then. I still think about him. I still see his face in my mind, the way the blood dripped from his mouth, the way he leaned against my car and demanded a ride. I still don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went. But I know one thing. Something about that night wasn't right. And I don't think I'll ever forget it. When I was 12 years old, my friend invited me to his birthday sleepover. He lived out in Yakima, Washington, near a huge orchard that stretched out for miles. It was the kind of place where the nights were dark, real dark, with only the moon and stars lighting up the sky. My older brother, who was 14 at the time, came with me, along with a few other friends. We spent the evening like any other birthday night, watching movies, eating cake, playing games. It was fun, but as the night wore on, I started thinking about my friend's dog. He had run off a couple of days before, and no one had seen him since. I figured since there were a few of us, it might be a good idea to go look for him. It wasn't just about finding the dog. We all liked to run around and explore, and the idea of going out into the orchard at night felt exciting. We grabbed a couple of flashlights, and even a pair of binoculars someone had lying around. The house sat near the road, and behind it, a small dirt path led straight into the orchard. At first, it was easy walking. The ground was dry, packed down from years of use. The trees stood in neat, uniform rows, their branches twisting toward the sky. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional rustling of leaves when the wind picked up. It was colder out there than I expected, and I pulled my hoodie tighter around me. As we moved further in, the path started to disappear, turning into patches of dirt and tangled grass. We crossed over a small creek, stepping carefully on rocks to keep our shoes dry. The ground sloped up ahead, forming a series of low hills covered in tall grass and wild shrubs. We weren't really talking about the dog anymore. We were just wandering, shining our lights around, half hoping to see movement in the distance, but mostly just soaking in the eerie feeling of being so far from the house. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved on top of the hill. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just a trick of the shadows. But then I focused, my heart pounding. There was something standing up there, just barely visible in the moonlight. It wasn't a person, that much I knew right away. It was big, really big. It stood on two legs, but its body looked thick, almost furry. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. It wasn't moving at first, just standing there like it was watching us. I fumbled with the binoculars, raising them to my eyes. The moment I focused on it, it started running. Down the hill. Straight at us. I froze. My mind refused to make sense of what I was seeing. It was fast, much faster than any person. The way it moved was unnatural, covering ground in long, heavy strides. The tall grass bent under its weight, flattening as it charged toward us. My stomach dropped. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I forced myself to move, shoving the binoculars into my brother's hands. "Look," I managed to say, barely able to get the word out. He lifted them, only for a second. Then he dropped them, let them hit the dirt, and took off running. He didn't say a word, didn't scream, didn't shout, just turned and ran like his life depended on it. That's when I knew, whatever I had just seen, he had seen it too. I didn't think. I just ran after him, legs burning, lungs tight. My friends must have seen us because suddenly, everyone was running. The orchard blurred past us, branches scraping against my arms as I pushed forward. I couldn't hear anything except our footsteps, and the pounding of my own heartbeat. We hit the creek, barely pausing before leaping over it. The moment my foot landed on the other side, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. I didn't stop to wonder where it went. I just kept running. The house came into view, porch light glowing like a beacon. We didn't slow down until we burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind us. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. My brother was leaning against the wall, pale, eyes wide. Nobody spoke for a long time. My friend's parents asked what was wrong, but no one knew what to say. How could we? What could we even call what we had just seen? We stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in the living room, listening. Every time the house creaked, every time the wind howled outside, I flinched. My brother barely spoke. I knew he had seen it clearer than I had, and that scared me more than anything. He wasn't the kind of person to get spooked easily, but whatever was out there, it had shaken him. In the morning, we went back. Not far, just to the edge of the orchard. The binoculars were still lying in the dirt where my brother had dropped them. The grass on the hill was flattened, like something heavy had run through it. But there were no tracks, no prints, nothing that could explain what we had seen. We searched for a while, but deep down, I think we knew we wouldn't find anything. We never talked about it much after that. Sometimes my mom brings it up, laughing, like it's just some spooky childhood memory. But when my brother and I look at each other, we don't laugh. We know what we saw, and we both agree on one thing. It wasn't human. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The nightmare I had just escaped from was still clinging to the edges of my mind, refusing to let go. My hands were shaking as I wiped the moisture from my forehead. The pain, the terror, the overwhelming sense of doom in that dream had felt too real. It wasn't like other nightmares that faded into nonsense the moment you woke up. This one left a mark, something lingering beneath my skin, something I couldn't shake off. I sat up in bed, trying to catch my breath, when I heard it. Ding dong. The sound of my doorbell cut through the silence of my apartment. I froze. Ding dong. It rang again. I turned to my bedside clock. 5 a.m. It was still pitch dark outside. My apartment was on the third floor of a small building, and the entrance was downstairs. I wasn't expecting anyone. My mind struggled to make sense of it. Was I still dreaming? Had the nightmare followed me into reality? I hesitated before swinging my legs off the bed and standing up. The air in my room felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I grabbed my phone and checked the camera feed for my front entrance. The grainy footage showed nothing. Just the empty porch, slick with rain, the street lamp casting long shadows. I switched the camera to night vision. Still nothing. Maybe it was some drunk coming home to the wrong apartment? A neighbor's friend at the wrong door? That had to be it. I walked over to the front door of my apartment, making sure it was locked. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing but the quiet hum of my fridge from the kitchen. I exhaled and was about to turn back when, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, 3 times in rapid succession. I whipped around. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The sound wasn't coming from my apartment door. It was the front entrance of the building again. I raced back to my phone and checked the camera feed. Still nothing. My stomach twisted. The doorbell had been rung 3 times, urgently, like someone was desperate to be let in. And yet there was no one there. I stood there for a moment, gripping my phone so tight my fingers ached. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. Maybe it was a prank, some kid messing around. But who the hell plays pranks at 5 in the morning, in the rain? And how were they vanishing so quickly between rings? There was no place to hide, just the open porch and the empty street beyond it. I shook my head. I wasn't going to let paranoia take over. I turned off the doorbell ringer and went back to bed, my heart still racing. It took a long time to fall asleep again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my curtains, warming the room. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. I checked my phone. No notifications, no messages. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I had heard. I went downstairs and opened the front door. The porch was wet from last night's rain. I stepped outside, scanning the area. No footprints. No signs of anyone being there. Just the damp pavement and the distant sound of birds waking up. I looked at the doorbell. I pressed it once. It chimed normally. No malfunction. I glanced at the security camera. The footage from last night was still there. I scrolled back to 5 a.m. and watched. The streetlight flickered slightly. The rain fell in a steady drizzle. The first 2 doorbell rings happened, but no one was there. Then, at 5:03 a.m., the 3 rapid rings. Still nothing. I watched it 3 times, trying to see if I had missed something. A shadow, a movement, anything. But the porch remained empty. I swallowed hard. Someone had rung my doorbell, but they hadn't been caught on camera. I spent the rest of the day trying to shake off the unease. By nightfall, I had almost convinced myself it had been some kind of glitch. Maybe the button had gotten stuck and triggered itself. Maybe it was interference. I tried to forget about it. Until the next night. It happened again. Ding dong. This time, I was awake when it rang. I sat up, every muscle in my body tensed. My eyes darted to the clock, 5 a.m. Ding dong. Ding dong. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone, opening the camera feed immediately. Nothing. The street was empty. The porch was empty. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. I backed away from the screen, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind raced for an explanation. A wiring issue? Some kind of interference? But why only at this exact time? Why 3 times in a row, like the night before? And why did it feel like someone was watching me? I didn't go downstairs this time. I didn't check the door. I stayed in my room, heart pounding in my chest, and waited for the ringing to stop. It did, eventually, but sleep never came after that. I called maintenance the next day. They checked the wiring, tested the doorbell. Everything was working fine. No malfunctions. No technical explanation. That night, I stayed up until 5 a.m., watching the security feed live. The moment the clock hit 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Loud and clear. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The porch was empty. No movement. No sign of life. And yet someone or something was ringing my doorbell. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I moved. It didn't matter that my lease still had months left. I packed my things and found another place. Somewhere far away from that apartment. I never found out what was causing it. I never found any logical explanation. But even now, whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding for no reason, I half expect to hear it. Ding dong. I had been volunteering at the community police station for 3 years. It wasn't an intense job. Mostly, I handled minor cases, lost wallets, vandalism, small thefts. The station wasn't equipped with holding cells or anything like that. It was a small operation, meant to be accessible to the public, not a full-fledged law enforcement center. We didn't even have a patrol car. I liked the work, though. It gave me a sense of contribution, a feeling that I was helping people in a way that mattered. One Friday afternoon in the middle of summer, I was sitting at my desk, the air thick and slow, the kind of heat that made time feel sluggish. It was a slow day. The constable on duty had gone to the back to take care of some paperwork. I was left in the front, organizing old reports, listening to the quiet hum of the station. Then, the door opened, letting in a brief gust of hot air. An older man walked in. He was carrying a handbag. It wasn't anything special, just a simple, worn-out bag, the kind you'd see a woman carrying at a grocery store. He placed it on the counter and told me he had found it in a nearby parking lot. Nothing strange about that. People turned in lost items all the time. I took his information, thanked him, and watched as he walked out the door, leaving the bag behind. I looked at it for a moment before unzipping it. Inside, I expected the usual, maybe a wallet, some makeup, a phone. Instead, the bag was filled with small pieces of paper. Hundreds of them. Each one had a name on one side and a phone number on the other. It wasn't what I expected. It felt oddly meticulous, almost clinical. I reached in, taking a handful, flipping through them. Different names, different numbers. No addresses, no explanations. Just names and numbers. I set the papers aside and reached further inside, finding a wallet at the bottom. I pulled it out and opened it. No ID, no credit cards. Just a single photograph tucked in the slot where a license would normally go. The photo was simple. 3 people. A woman in her early 30s smiling, her arms wrapped around 2 little girls. The younger girl looked about 4, the older one maybe 8. They looked happy, standing in what seemed like a park, trees and a wooden fence in the background. I turned the picture over. There were names written on the back. Caitlin behind the woman, Sarah, behind the youngest girl. The space behind the older girl only had one word: pickup. I stared at it for a while, the weight of it pressing down on me in a way I couldn't explain. Pickup. Not a name, just a word. I looked back at the pieces of paper. There were so many. I started counting. 118 in total. I read the names. None seemed familiar. No patterns jumped out at me. Just names, neatly written in ink, each with a phone number scrawled on the back. It was a slow day. I had time. I started calling the numbers. One by one. The first few answered quickly. When I asked if they knew a woman named Caitlin or her daughters, they all said no. I kept going, marking the ones I had called. More no's. More confusion. Some people were polite, others sounded annoyed. I kept at it. After the first 20, a pattern started to emerge. Not in connections, but in the complete lack of them. None of these people knew each other. I asked a few of them if they recognized any of the other names I had called. No one did. I called more. Another 20. Then another. Still nothing. About a third of the numbers weren't in service. Others went to voicemail. The ones that did answer had no idea who these people were or why their names and numbers were written down in a bag. The constable came back, and I told him about it. He was intrigued, but not overly concerned. He logged the bag and its contents into the system, and we decided to hold on to it for a while. Maybe someone would come looking for it. Over the next few weeks, a few of the other volunteers got curious. We all tried to piece it together. We looked into the names, checked public records, social media. Nothing tied them together. No common workplaces, no shared addresses, no criminal records. A few of them lived in the same general area, but that wasn't unusual. No one ever came looking for the bag. We debated what to do with the picture. Maybe put out a missing persons notice, but without any official report, there was nothing to suggest they were missing. The names weren't unique enough to track down without more information. We hit dead end after dead end. Eventually, after about a month, we closed the file. The bag was discarded. The names remained meaningless. The photograph was just another unsolved mystery. I thought about it often. About Caitlin, about Sarah, about the unnamed child marked only as pickup. What did it mean? Was it something sinister? Something innocent but strange? I never got an answer. No one ever did. But even now, whenever my phone rings with an unknown number, I hesitate, just for a second, wondering if it's one of them, finally calling back. I was 21, and like a lot of girls my age, I had tried online dating. By then, I had been on a handful of dates, some decent, some boring, a couple of hookups, a few short-lived relationships. Nothing too crazy had ever happened, so I had started to let my guard down. I wasn't the type to be overly cautious anymore. That night, I had been on a date, and it was boring. One of those awkward, conversation-lacking meetups where you both know there's zero chemistry, but you sit through it anyway. On the way home, I was already texting another guy I had been chatting with online. I mentioned the disappointing date, and he threw out a suggestion. Why not go for a spontaneous drive with him? He said he could show me around the city, said he knew all the best spots. I was still fairly new to the area, so that sounded kind of exciting. I agreed without much thought. He picked a pub near my house as a meetup spot. When I got there, I saw him waiting outside his car. He didn't quite look like his photos, but not in a shocking way. Just a little rougher around the edges, more unkempt. His car was an absolute mess. Empty soda bottles, old receipts, random clothes tossed in the back. I ignored it. He was young, like me. It didn't seem like a red flag at the time. We started driving. I assumed we'd just be circling around the city, maybe stopping somewhere for a snack or to sit and talk. But as we drove, I noticed something. We weren't just driving around, we were driving away. Away from my house, away from the city. I asked him where we were going. He said he needed gas, that he could get it cheaper further out. Okay, cheap, but whatever. I wasn't exactly rolling in cash either, but he kept driving. We passed the last tram stop, then the last train stop. I watched the city lights start to disappear in the rearview mirror. It was almost 1:30 a.m. I glanced at my phone, 17% battery. That was when he decided to casually drop something into the conversation. He wasn't actually allowed to be driving. Something about a DUI. Something about how he never really drove unless he was on something. How if the cops pulled us over, He'd be taken straight to jail for avoiding court for the past 2 years. He even had paperwork in the car to prove it, which he showed me. I stared at the documents in his hand, my stomach twisting. My first instinct was to open my phone and text someone. Anyone. I sent a message to my friend. Told them where I was, who I was with, his contact info. Just in case. Then I told him I wanted to go home. "We're almost there," he said. Then he pulled off the highway and started driving up a hill. The road was narrow, winding. And then suddenly there was fog. Thick, suffocating fog. The kind where you can't see more than a few feet in front of the car. The kind where you have no idea where you are. I felt panic clawing up my throat. This was the part in the horror movies where people disappeared, where no one ever found the body. I didn't want to be that girl. I told him I needed to go home. Now, he pulled the car over to the side of the road and leaned back in his seat. Said he needed a revive recovery break. I felt trapped. I knew I had to stay calm, had to be smart. I told him he had 10 minutes before I called the cops. But the truth was, I had already told my friend everything. If I didn't answer my phone soon, they'd know something was wrong. For 10 long minutes, I sat there, barely breathing, every muscle in my body tense. The fog swirled around us outside, thick and eerie, making it impossible to see what was beyond the headlights. I kept my hands in my lap, pretending to be relaxed while my brain was screaming at me to run, to get out. Finally, he sighed, stretched, and started the car again. I held my breath as he turned around and started driving back toward the city. The ride back was silent. I sat rigid in my seat, watching the road, watching him. Every turn, every street sign, every landmark, I memorized it all. I had never been so alert in my life. He didn't say much on the way back, just mumbled to himself, yawning every few minutes. I felt like I was holding my breath for the entire drive. When we finally got close to my place, I told him to drop me off at a gas station instead of my house. I wasn't about to let him know where I lived. As soon as the car rolled to a stop, I grabbed my bag, yanked the door open, and stepped out. I didn't run. I didn't want to give him a reason to follow me, but I walked fast. Straight into the store, straight past the cashier, straight into the bathroom, where I locked the door and just stood there, hands shaking. I pulled out my phone, 4% battery. I called my friend. They answered on the first ring. "You okay?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah," I said. "I just need a ride home." I never got into a stranger's car again. I was maybe 5 or 6 when it happened. I had a cold, just a small one. My mom was working at the hospital that weekend, so it was just my dad, my brother, and me at home. I don't remember feeling too sick, just tired. My dad told me to go to bed in the middle of the day, and I listened. I don't remember having a fever, but over the years, I've convinced myself that must be what happened, because there's no other explanation that makes sense. I lay in bed, eyes shut, trying to sleep. I remember squeezing them closed, thinking that if I kept them shut long enough, I'd drift off. The room was warm, but I felt a breeze on my face. It was summer, so my window was open. Nothing unusual, just the wind coming in. But it made me open my eyes, and they were there, above my bed, hanging in the air, silent, watching me, hooded figures, no bodies, just heads and shoulders floating, their skin red, raw, burned looking, their faces stretched into dark smiles. No eyes, or if they had them, I couldn't see, just shadows beneath their hoods. They didn't move at first. They just hung there, so close to me, so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. Then they laughed. A deep, scratching sound that started low and rose up, filling the room, growing and growing until it felt like it was inside my head. They moved now, circling me, their laughter rising, surrounding me. I remember putting my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. I shut my eyes and cried, curled up in the bed, but the sound only grew. I screamed for my dad. The door burst open. He ran in, grabbed me, held me tight. The laughter stopped. The figures were gone. He told me it was just a dream. I tried to believe him, but I had been awake. I knew I had been awake. There's a gap in my memory after that. I can't explain it. I don't remember what happened immediately after. I don't remember what my dad did, or if my brother said anything. It's like my mind skips forward, jumping past the moments that came next. But I remember the car. I was in the back seat, in the middle, sitting in the trench between the seats. My knees were pressed against my chest, my hands over my ears. My mom was in the back with me, sitting sideways with her legs on either side of me. She was holding me, trying to protect me. I was screaming, "They're back. They won't leave. They want me dead." I don't remember getting in the car. I don't remember my dad driving. I just remember the feeling, the sheer panic, the terror that made my whole body shake. My mom's arms wrapped around me, trying to hold me still, trying to keep me safe, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like they were still there, just beyond my vision, just outside the car. Watching, waiting, and then nothing. I know we were going to the hospital. I assumed they thought the fever was making me hallucinate. Maybe it was. Maybe that's all it was. A sickness, a high temperature, a fever dream that felt too real. But even now, I don't remember what happened at the hospital. I don't remember getting better or going home. I don't remember anything after that night. What I do remember, what I still feel, even as an adult, is the silence. Sometimes when it's too quiet, when everything seems still, I feel it. That same sensation I felt back then. Not just quiet, but an emptiness, a pressure, a silence so deep it hurts. And in those moments, my heart pounds, my breath catches, and I have to move, have to make a sound, have to do something to break it. Because in that silence, I feel like they're still there. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. But these two experiences changed my perspective forever. I tried to rationalize them, tried to convince myself that there had to be some logical explanation, but deep down, I knew something was off. Something was wrong in that house. I didn't want to believe it, but belief stopped being a choice after what I saw and felt. The first time it happened, I was 14. Our house was a 2-story building, and my bedroom was upstairs. My parents' bedroom was directly across from mine, and if I walked out of my door, I'd be looking straight into theirs. To my right, a staircase led downstairs to the living room. At the bottom of the stairs, if I turned left, I'd go through the dining room and either walk straight into the kitchen or turn left again into a small hallway leading to the bathroom. We always left a small light on downstairs in case anyone had to get up during the night. My dad usually slept downstairs on the couch. Their bed was a heated waterbed, and he always complained about getting too hot. So most nights, he would just crash on the couch. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up needing to pee. Groggy and half asleep, I climbed out of bed, rubbing my eyes. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge downstairs and the occasional creak of the house settling. I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway and began descending the stairs, careful to step lightly. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight, but I was too tired to care. When I reached the bottom, I turned to head toward the bathroom. That's when I saw it. The glass front door was directly across from the bathroom, and in its reflection, I saw my dad. He was leaving the bathroom, just like he normally would if he had gotten up in the middle of the night. His posture, his sluggish movements, everything about him seemed right. I didn't think much of it at first. I knew how grumpy he was when he first woke up, and I didn't want to get in his way in the narrow hallway. So still half asleep, I sat down on the bottom step and waited for him to walk past me and head back to the couch. Only he never did. Seconds passed. I waited, listening for his footsteps, the sound of him settling onto the couch, anything. But all I heard was the steady, rhythmic sound of breathing, deep, slow breathing from the direction of the living room. And then a snore. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, on the couch, was my dad. He was fast asleep, completely undisturbed. His chest rose and fell in time with the snoring. I looked back at the glass door, my heart pounding. The hallway was empty. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in place. I felt like if I moved, something would notice me. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. My whole body felt ice cold. I didn't think about how ridiculous it was to be scared of going to the bathroom. I just knew I couldn't stay down there any longer. Slowly, carefully, I stood up and backed toward the stairs. I took one step, then another, trying to move as quietly as possible. My skin crawled as if something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I bolted up the stairs, 2 at a time, and practically threw myself into my room. I locked the door, jumped into bed, and pulled the covers over my head like a scared little kid. My heart was racing so hard I thought it would explode. I told my parents the next morning. My mom dismissed it immediately. My dad just grunted, and said I had let my imagination get the best of me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been half asleep and confused. I tried to believe that. I really did. But something about it just didn't sit right. For the next few weeks, I tried to forget about it. A few weird noises here and there, random creaks and soft thuds, but I brushed them off. Houses make noise. That's what I told myself. Then, a couple of months later, something else happened. And this time, there was no rationalizing it. I was 15 now. It was a regular evening, around 8 p.m. My dad was working late, so it was just me and my mom at home. She was upstairs cleaning, and I was in the living room on the family computer. The setup was pretty standard. The computer desk was against the wall, and the bright ceiling lights meant that if someone stood behind me, their shadow would cast over the screen. I liked to listen to music while I browsed the internet, but I never wore both headphones properly. I always kept one ear free because I hated feeling completely unaware of my surroundings. I heard the vacuum shut off upstairs, followed by a soft rustling noise. A second later, I heard footsteps on the carpet behind me. A soft, familiar sound, denim cuffs brushing lightly against the fibers. I recognized it instantly, the way my mom's jeans sounded when she walked. A shadow flickered over the screen. She did this all the time, stood behind me, looking over my shoulder, trying to see what I was doing. It was annoying. I sighed, pulled off my headphones, and turned around. No one was there. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. My skin prickled. The air behind me felt heavy, like something was still there. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Mom." My voice came out shaky. "Yeah." Her response came from upstairs. I jumped up from the chair so fast I nearly knocked it over. I ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. My mom was standing in the hallway, looking confused. "What's wrong?" she asked. I could barely get the words out. You weren't just behind me?" Her brow furrowed. "No." The vacuum belt snapped in half. The whole thing started smoking, so I had to unplug it. It had happened at the exact same second I heard the footsteps behind me. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hands trembling, my heart pounding against my ribs. That was the last time I ever felt truly alone in that house. Even when no one else was home, I knew something was there. I never saw anything outright, never had proof, but I didn't need it. Some things don't need explanations. Some things just are. I still don't know what I saw that night in the glass door, or who stood behind me in the living room. Maybe I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I wasn't alone. And I never really was. Junior year, summer just around the corner, we threw a party at my house for a friend who was graduating. It wasn't anything crazy, but there was alcohol for everyone who wanted it. My mom had always been laid back about that kind of thing, letting us drink as long as we stayed at the house. I never cared for drinking myself, always been straight edge, but it didn't bother me that others did. The night was meant to be a send-off, one last time for everyone to cut loose together before things changed. The house wasn't huge, but it was big enough to fit everyone comfortably. We mostly kept to the living room and backyard. People were drinking, laughing, and music filled the air. I had my girlfriend over for the first time, and at some point, we slipped away from the party, locking ourselves in my room. It wasn't about avoiding anyone, just having our own space in the middle of the chaos. The noise from outside was muffled, and it felt like we were in our own world for a while. Time blurred. The party kept going outside the room, voices rising and falling, the occasional burst of laughter or shouting drifting through the walls. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, someone was pounding on my door. It was loud, desperate. The kind of knocking that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I sat up fast, my girlfriend still half asleep next to me. The knocking didn't stop. It was frantic, and then came the shouting. Two of my friends, their voices breaking, screaming for me to let them in. My heart was already racing when I got up and unlocked the door. They pushed inside so fast that I barely had time to react before I slammed it shut again and locked it. I could see it in their faces, the sheer panic. They were breathing hard, shaking, looking back at the door like something might come through at any second. I was trying to process what was happening when they told me. Someone at the party had a knife. I remember standing there, trying to wrap my head around it. We weren't that kind of group. No fights, no real drama, just a bunch of kids drinking, celebrating, having a good time. But my friend, he had a knife. Not just holding it either. He was saying he was possessed. I couldn't even respond. I just stood there, listening as they explained how he had been fine earlier, drinking a little but nothing crazy. Then something shifted. He started acting weird, saying things that didn't make sense. His voice changed, the way he moved changed. It wasn't just being drunk, they swore it wasn't. And then he pulled out a knife. They didn't know where he got it, but he had it, gripping it tight, mumbling under his breath. People had backed away, telling him to chill out, but he wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at anyone. And then he said something that made everyone freeze. He wasn't in control. He kept repeating it, saying he couldn't stop himself, that something else was inside him. He started moving toward people, slow at first, like he was testing himself, seeing how far he could go. That's when my friends ran, straight to my room, banging on my door, screaming for me to let them in. We were all inside now, the four of us, and I could feel my own pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if he was outside the door or still in the living room. I didn't know if he was actually going to hurt someone. All I knew was that my friends were terrified, and that terror was starting to spread to me. We stayed quiet, listening. My room was at the end of the hall, and through the door, we could hear muffled voices. Nothing clear, but there was movement, people talking in low, urgent tones. And then something else. Something strange. A sound right outside my door. Not knocking. Not footsteps. Just breathing. Heavy, slow breathing. My chest tightened. My friends looked at me wide-eyed, and I knew they heard it too. None of us moved. The air felt thick, like the walls were closing in. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the breathing faded. No footsteps. No sound of retreating. Just gone. Minutes passed. Then more. My legs were stiff from standing so still, my ears straining for any noise outside. Finally, one of my friends whispered that they thought it was safe, that maybe he had left, but none of us moved toward the door. Eventually, the party outside started to quiet down. I don't know how long we stayed in there, but at some point, we heard people leaving. Someone said something about calling his parents. Someone else mentioned getting him outside. We didn't open the door until everything was completely silent. When we finally stepped out, the house was nearly empty. A few people were still lingering, looking shaken. I saw my mom in the kitchen, talking in a low voice with one of the other parents who had come to pick people up. She looked over at me and gave me a nod, but she didn't say anything. The guy with the knife was gone. They had gotten him outside, away from everyone. He was still out of it, but not violent anymore. Someone had taken the knife away. And then, the weirdest part, he told them later that he had tried to come to my room, that he had wanted to, but something stopped him. He couldn't cross the doorway. It didn't make sense at the time. He wasn't drunk enough to be blacking out, but he swore he couldn't go past it, like there was a wall in front of him. And then I remembered something. When we moved into this house, my mom had done something. She had always been into New Age stuff, talked about energy and protection and all that. She told me once that she put spells on my door and hers, things meant to keep out bad spirits. I never thought much of it. Just something she did, like burning sage or lighting candles. But this guy didn't know that. No one did. Even now, I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it was just something in his head. Maybe he really believed he was possessed, and that belief made him act a certain way. Or maybe it was something else. Something I don't have words for. We never talked about it much after that. He got help, cleaned himself up, moved on. But I'll never forget that night. The way the air felt wrong. The way the breathing sounded just outside my door. I still live in that house. The spells my mom put up, I've never touched them, and I never will. I had been on the road for nearly a year, pedaling through countries, camping wherever the land allowed, playing my travel guitar in the wilderness. From the deep green of the Amazon in Ecuador to the high, cold mountains of Peru, I had lived under the sky, learned the sounds of the night, and adapted to the isolation of solo travel. By the time I made it back to the US, my body was worn but strong, my mind steady. There were only 2 days left before I reached home. That night, I was in the Arizona desert, my home state, feeling relaxed for the first time in months. The dirt road I had followed for miles had been empty, stretching like a thin, pale scar across the vast land. The sun had dipped below the horizon in a burst of pink and orange, fading to a deep navy sky pricked with sharp, bright stars. The air was dry and cooling fast. I found a flat spot beside a cluster of saguaros and set up my tent. My food was tied up high in the crook of a cactus to keep it away from scavengers. There was no one around for miles. I sat outside for a while, picking lightly at my guitar, listening to the sounds of the desert night. The chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle of wind through brittle shrubs, the distant call of some night bird. It was peaceful, quiet. Then I heard it. Soft, rapid steps, scurrying across the hard-packed dirt. I turned my head. Something small was moving near the tent. It would come closer, then stop. Then closer again. I leaned forward slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but whatever it was darted away before I could see it. A ringtail? A raccoon? Maybe even a skunk. I wasn't worried, just curious. It kept coming back, repeating the same pattern: approach, stop, retreat. Always just out of sight. I decided to get a better look. I unzipped my tent, leaving the flap open, and sat just inside with my headlamp turned off but ready, my finger resting lightly on the button. The desert was dark, almost absolute in its stillness. I waited. Minutes passed, then I heard it again. The quick, light sound of small feet moving toward me. Closer, closer. Then I clicked on my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, landing directly on two eyes staring at me. Wide, unblinking, reflecting back a pale yellow glow. I expected it to bolt, like before. But it didn't. It just stood there, staring. My pulse quickened slightly, but I kept my head steady. Probably just some curious little animal. I shifted the beam of light slightly to the left. Two more eyes. A chill ran through me, tightening my spine. I swung the light to the right. Two more eyes. I inhaled sharply and turned my headlamp in a slow arc around me. Two more eyes. Then two more. And two more. They were behind me, too. I swallowed, heart hammering now. My tent was surrounded. I tried to force my brain to make sense of it. What animal does this? Coyotes? No, coyotes don't surround things like this. Bobcats? No, too many. Javelinas? But their eyes wouldn't glow like that. Mountain lions? No. This was wrong. I realized I wasn't breathing. I forced in a slow breath, trying to stay calm, to think. I needed to break the silence, make myself big, loud. I grabbed my guitar and slammed my fingers down on the strings, strumming as hard as I could. The sound rang out, sharp, vibrating in the cold night air. I kept going. I played and played, hitting discordant chords, not caring what it sounded like, only caring that it was loud. The eyes didn't move. I strummed harder, the sound echoing into the desert, until my fingers ached and my wrist burned. And then, one by one, the eyes began to disappear. Slowly, slipping back into the darkness, blinking out like dying embers. I kept playing, kept strumming, kept going until the first light of dawn began to stretch across the sky. Only then did I stop. The desert was empty again, silent. I didn't waste time. I packed up my gear as fast as my hands would let me. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I didn't stop. I threw everything onto my bike and rode hard, faster than I had in months. I didn't look back. By midday, I reached a small roadside gas station. I got off my bike, locked it, and walked inside, my legs unsteady beneath me. I grabbed a drink, sat down, and only then allowed myself to breathe. To this day, I don't know what surrounded me that night. I don't think I want to. In 2004, I went canyoneering in Utah with a group from my climbing gym. There were 8 of us in total, including Rick, the most experienced climber among us and our appointed leader. He had all the gear and assured us he had studied the route well. On our way to the cave, we stopped by a climber's cafe and met an older man named Joe. He was alone but heading to the exact same cave. Since he had a fair amount of gear, we teamed up. It felt odd that he was going alone, but we figured an extra set of hands wouldn't hurt. He was middle-aged, lean, and quiet. The only time he spoke up was when he said he had a bad feeling about the climb. We brushed him off, not wanting to jinx the trip. It was late July. The sky was blue, the air was warm, and there were no signs of rain. We set out on foot after parking our cars, hiking for 2 days to reach the cave entrance. The hike itself was tough, but the real challenge was still ahead. Among us was Tracy, the girlfriend of one of Rick's best friends. She had complained the entire hike and seemed unprepared for what was coming. We began our descent into the cave, navigating tight passages and steep drops. I was still a rookie, barely capable of reading a map or setting up proper anchors. The deeper we went, the colder it became. The walls were damp, the air thin. The feeling of being inside a mountain was oppressive, the weight of rock pressing down from all sides. Hours passed, and then we heard it, a low, deep rumble. It was almost mechanical, like a generator buried deep inside the cave. Then came a rush of cold air. I felt it against my face first, then my hands. It sent a shiver through my body. That's when Joe lost it. He started screaming, running. His headlamp swung wildly, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. I had never seen a man his age move like that. The sound grew louder, and then it hit us, water. A flash flood. We had no idea it had rained on the surface, but in the desert, rain miles away can trigger floods underground. Within seconds, the trickling stream at our feet turned into a rushing torrent. The water was icy, the kind that steals your breath and locks your muscles. It rose fast, ankle-deep, knee-deep, waist-deep. The cave walls amplified the roar of the water, making it impossible to hear anything else. Panic set in. We were scrambling to move forward, but the water pushed against us with relentless force. Tracy froze, just stood there, blocking the rest of us. Her boyfriend, Dave, yanked her forward, but every second wasted was a second closer to death. We struggled against the current, our gear weighing us down. The walls were slick, offering no grip. The water climbed higher, hitting our chests. Every breath became a fight. My mind raced. Was this how I was going to die? Trapped underground, crushed by water and rock? I could hear the others screaming, but it was like white noise, blending with the deafening rush of the flood. Then we reached a larger chamber. The water dumped into it, forming a deep, freezing pool. I swam, my limbs aching from exhaustion and cold. The moment I hit the water, my right leg seized in a cramp so sharp I almost blacked out. The wetsuit barely helped. The water was untouched by sunlight, colder than anything I had ever felt. We thrashed to the other side, but we had a new problem. The chamber had multiple exits, tight crevices leading who knew where. We had no clear path, no way up without setting anchors. And the water was still rising. Joe, the man we had brushed off, was the only one who knew what to do. He pointed to the crevices and motioned for us to climb into them. We hauled ourselves up, pressing into the rock, our bodies shaking uncontrollably. The water continued to rise. My hands went numb. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. The girls sobbed. The guys were silent, staring at the water, at each other. No one spoke, but we were all thinking the same thing. How long until we drowned? The water rose past our feet. My heart pounded. It climbed higher, licking at our legs, then our waists. We had nowhere else to go. The questions came then. Was this it? Was I going to die here? Would they ever find our bodies? Would my family ever know what happened? Would we make the news? I couldn't stop the thoughts. They came in a relentless flood, drowning me before the water ever could. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the water stopped. The rush became a trickle, then silence. We sat there, shaking, unable to comprehend that we were still alive. The chamber was now nearly full. If the flood had lasted just a few more minutes, we would have been dead. But we weren't safe yet. We still had to get out. And here's the terrifying part. If Joe hadn't been with us, we wouldn't have. Rick, our so-called leader, had forgotten a crucial piece of gear. We had no way to set up an anchor system to climb out. But Joe did. He had the right gear, the right experience. If we hadn't picked him up at that cafe, we would have been stuck there for days, maybe longer. And Tracy, she would have been the first to go. She had brought a summer wetsuit, too thin, too loose. She was already shivering violently, barely able to move. Hypothermia would have taken her before rescue ever arrived. It took hours to set up a way out. Hours of grueling, mind-numbing exhaustion. We climbed, inch by inch, back through the flooded tunnels, hauling ourselves through the freezing water. And when we finally emerged from that cave, gasping in the warm desert air, it felt unreal. Like we had come back from the dead. We still had 2 days of hiking to reach the cars. 2 days of dragging ourselves through the wilderness, carrying Tracy, who could barely walk. 2 days of silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. We had stared death in the face. We had barely made it out. And all because of a freak storm, miles away, that we never even saw. I don't know what happened to Joe after that. He didn't stick around. He just packed his gear and left. I never saw him again. But I do know this. If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. It was late. Too late for me to be out alone on a road like this. The countryside was different at night, not the same peaceful place it was during the day. The trees leaned in close over the road, their bare branches stretching toward me like fingers. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the light seemed weak against the sheer blackness of the night. I wasn't scared, not at first, just anxious to get home. I had been visiting a friend who lived farther out in the countryside, and I had stayed later than I meant to. I didn't want to drive these roads in the dark, but here I was, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another car for miles, just my own reflection in the rearview mirror, the soft hum of the engine, and the occasional rustling of trees in the wind. It was one of those nights where the world felt unnaturally quiet, like everything was holding its breath. Then I saw it, a fallen tree, blocking the road ahead. It wasn't a small branch, or something I could just drive over. No, this was a thick, heavy tree trunk sprawled across both lanes. My heart sank. I slowed the car to a stop, my headlights illuminating the rough bark and tangled branches. There was no way around it. The ditch on either side of the road was too deep to drive through. I sighed, rubbing my hands together, trying to push away the growing unease creeping up my spine. I had to get out and check if there was any possible way to move around it. Maybe I could squeeze by on the side. Maybe I could push some of the branches out of the way. I left the engine running as I stepped out into the cold night. The air was crisp, biting at my exposed skin. The silence pressed in on me. I walked up to the tree, examining it under the pale glow of my headlights. No way was I getting past this. It was too big, too heavy. There was nothing to do but turn around and take another route home. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, but I told myself it was just the cold. I turned back to my car and got in, locking the doors out of habit. Taking a deep breath, I put the car in reverse and carefully maneuvered my way back until I found a small clearing to turn around. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The tree sat in the middle of the road, still and unmoving, but something felt off. I shook my head, brushing off the feeling, and focused on getting home. A few miles down the road, I noticed something behind me. A light, small at first, but growing brighter. A motorbike. That wasn't unusual. People rode bikes out here all the time. But something about the way it was following me made me uneasy. The rider wasn't trying to pass. Instead, they stayed back just far enough, their headlights glaring in my mirrors. I swallowed hard, keeping my hands steady on the wheel. Maybe they were just going the same way as me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then they flashed their high beams. Once, twice, again. I clenched my jaw, my pulse picking up speed. They wanted my attention. Why? I didn't know them. I had no reason to stop. I pressed harder on the gas, my heart thudding against my ribs. The road was narrow, winding through empty fields and patches of dark forest. I could feel the weight of the night pressing in around me, the bike's headlights bouncing in my mirrors. I turned onto a smaller road, the quickest way home. Maybe they'd keep going straight. But they didn't. They followed. The high beams flashed again, over and over. Panic clawed at my throat. I didn't know what they wanted, but I wasn't going to stop and find out. My fingers tightened around the wheel as I sped up, my little car shaking slightly on the rough road. My house wasn't far now. I just had to get there. The moment I pulled into my driveway, I slammed the car into park and jumped out, sprinting for the front door. My hands fumbled with the keys, shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. My dad was inside. I just had to get in. The roar of the bike engine cut off. I turned my head just in time to see the rider dismount. He was breathing heavily, his helmet still on, but I could feel his urgency. I threw the door open, calling for my dad. Footsteps thundered behind me as he rushed out, meeting the man head-on. I expected shouting, an argument, something. But the biker was shaking his head, gasping for breath, his hands gesturing wildly toward my car. I turned, and that's when I saw it. The back door of my car. Wide open. The seat empty. The car had been locked. I had locked it when I got back in. And yet the door stood open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. The biker looked at me, his voice finally steady enough to speak. He had seen it. He had seen someone climb into the back seat of my car while I was checking the tree. I felt my legs go weak. My stomach twisted into knots. My skin went cold. My dad grabbed a flashlight and went to check the car, but there was nothing. Just the open door and the silence. The road was empty. The field stretched out on either side, endless and dark. Whoever had been there was gone. I never saw them. I never heard them, but they had been there, watching, waiting, and if it hadn't been for the biker, I would have driven all the way home with them sitting just behind me in the dark. I don't remember much about being a toddler, not in the way that people remember birthdays or what their favorite toy was. I don't remember things in pictures or happy moments. I remember feelings. I remember being scared. I remember feeling like I wasn't alone, even when I was. And I remember the sound of scratching in the walls at night, the way my mother told me it was just mice, but I knew better. When I was about 2 years old, my mother bought a Ouija board. She never really explained why, but she always had an interest in things like that: horoscopes, palm readings, superstitions. She would sit at the table after I went to bed, tracing the letters on the board with her fingertips, asking questions. It wasn't long before she said she started talking to a spirit, a little boy, an 8-year-old named Henry. She told me about him when I was older, how he always wanted to talk, how he seemed lonely, but mostly how he hated me. He told my mother that I had stolen his place in the world, that I was never supposed to be born, that my mother was supposed to be his. She admitted that she had lost a baby a year before I was born. She had never told me that before. She never even told my father. She just sat there in the dim kitchen light, holding a cup of coffee, and told me how Henry made her feel like she had failed someone she never got to meet. The more she used the board, the stranger things got in our house. She would wake up to find furniture moved. Things would go missing. She would hear whispers at night, soft and close, like someone was speaking right next to her ear. And then there was me. I would wake up crying, pointing at things no one else could see. I would talk to something in the dark, something my mother couldn't see. I would say things a child shouldn't know. And the worst part was, I wasn't the only one who noticed. Other people, family, neighbors, would come over and comment on the feeling in the house. It was heavy, like the air itself carried weight, pressing down on you, making it harder to breathe. My mother stopped using the Ouija board, but it didn't stop whatever she had let in. The voices didn't stop. The shadows didn't stop moving. I didn't stop waking up in the middle of the night, staring into the dark, feeling something stare back. As I got older, it didn't go away. I learned to live with it. The footsteps in the hall at night, the feeling of being watched, the way I could hear something scratching in the walls, even when my parents swore there were no mice. It was always there, like a sickness you never fully recover from, a cold spot in the house that never warmed up. I started hearing my name when no one was home. I would be in the bathroom, door locked, and I'd hear someone say it right outside the door. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was clear as day, like someone was standing just on the other side. But when I'd open it, there would be no one there. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend. That's what my parents called it. I called him the Black Man, not because of his skin, but because he was always covered in shadows, always just out of focus. I would talk to him, play with him. My parents never thought much of it until one day I described him to them in detail. The tall figure, the old work clothes, the way his face was always half in the dark. My mother turned pale. She left the room without saying anything. Later, I overheard her talking to my father, whispering about the landlord's husband, the man who had died fixing our house years before we moved in, the man I had never met, the man I had just described perfectly. Years passed, but it never really stopped. I stopped talking about it. I stopped mentioning the things I heard, the things I saw. It was easier that way. If I ignored it, maybe it would go away. Maybe it wouldn't be real. But you can't ignore something that's always there, something that follows you. When I was 16, my mother went to a psychic. She never believed in them before, not really, but her friend convinced her to go. She sat down, expecting vague fortunes, general predictions about love and success. But the psychic looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "You were supposed to have 3 children." My mother didn't react at first. She just stared at her. Then the psychic asked about me. "You have a teenage son," she said. "Tall, dark hair. There is something following him, something that has been with him for years." My mother left without finishing the reading. She never went back. But that night, she sat me down and told me everything. Everything about Henry. Everything about the Ouija board. Everything about how, all these years, she thought it had just been in her head, until the psychic confirmed what she had feared all along. I never told her how bad it really was, how often I heard the whispers, how often I saw the shadows, how I could feel it, always just behind me, just out of sight. I didn't want to scare her. I didn't want to admit that maybe, after all these years, it wasn't just my imagination. I don't know if Henry is still with me. I don't know if he ever left. But I do know that even now, years later, I still hear things at night. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, feeling like someone is standing at the foot of my bed. I still see shadows move where there shouldn't be any. And sometimes, when it's really quiet, I swear I can hear someone breathing just behind me. I was tired that afternoon. The heat outside was thick and heavy, the kind that made every movement feel slow and lazy. We had been visiting some friends of my parents, people they had known for years, in a country far from home. I had enjoyed most of the trip, but by the last few days I was drained. Too much traveling, too much socializing, too many nights staying up late listening to the adults talk and laugh while I waited for them to finally call it a night. That afternoon, I decided to take a nap. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a simple bed covered in a thin sheet. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, sending a steady breeze down onto the room. I lay on my side, half awake, my mind drifting between consciousness and sleep, when I felt it, a faint tickle against my ear. At first, I didn't think much of it. My hair was longish, and with the fan blowing, it was easy to assume that a stray strand had brushed against my skin. I ignored it, sinking further into that in-between state where dreams start to creep in but reality still holds you in its grasp. But then it happened again, a soft, whisper-like touch right against the edge of my ear. Before I could react, there was a sudden, horrifying sensation. Something small, something alive, scurried into my ear canal. My entire body went rigid. A bolt of panic shot through me as I realized what had just happened. My heart pounded, and before I could stop myself, I was screaming. I clawed at my ear, trying desperately to get it out, but it was already too deep. The sensation was unbearable, tiny legs moving, the feeling of something wedging itself into a space it had no right to be in. I thrashed on the bed, my fingers digging into the side of my head, but nothing helped. It was inside, and I couldn't get it out. My mother rushed into the room, her face a mixture of confusion and alarm. I could barely get the words out between gasps of panic. Something's in my ear. I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. I could hear it. That was the worst part. The tiny, distinct noises of movement, clicking, and an eerie chirping sound that I never knew insects could make until that moment. It was impossibly loud, like it was directly next to my eardrum, amplifying every tiny movement. My breathing was ragged, my hands trembling as I sat up, desperate for some kind of relief. My mother took me by the arm and led me to the bathroom. Her voice was calm, too calm for what was happening. I knew she was trying to keep me from spiraling further into panic, but it wasn't working. She told me to tilt my head toward the light. I did as she said, hoping that the bug would see the brightness and crawl back out the way it had come. I stood there for what felt like forever, my head angled awkwardly, waiting for the nightmare to end. But it didn't. The bug either couldn't see the light or didn't care. It remained deep inside, shifting every so often, making its presence known in a way that sent fresh waves of horror through me. The minutes dragged on. The chirping had stopped, but the movements hadn't. Every time I felt it twitch, I shuddered, gripping the bathroom counter to keep myself grounded. The thought of it burrowing deeper, of it somehow getting stuck, of it never coming out, it was too much to bear. My mother finally decided we needed a new plan. "We'll flush it out," she said. Her voice was steady, but I could tell she wasn't entirely sure this would work. At that point, I didn't care what we did, as long as it ended. She grabbed a cup and filled it with water. "Hold still," she said. I braced myself, my stomach twisting into knots. She poured the water slowly into my ear. The cold rush filled the canal, and for a second, there was silence. Then, a tiny, high-pitched squeak, a sound I never expected to hear. It was so small, so faint, but unmistakably there. It sounded like the bug had been startled, like it had just realized it was in trouble. I wanted to tip my head immediately to get the water, and the bug, out as fast as possible, but my mother held me still. "Wait," she said. "Give it a second." I stayed frozen, feeling the water pressing against my eardrum, feeling the tiny movements inside my head slow, weaken. And then another sound, a soft, muffled blub blub blub. It was eerie, like a death rattle from something so small, something that shouldn't be capable of making such a sound. Then nothing. No more movement. No more clicking. Just silence. I swallowed hard. "I think it's dead," I whispered. My mother finally let me tilt my head, and I let the water spill out onto a towel. But the bug didn't come with it. I was shaking. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. We checked the towel, checked the sink. Nothing. I felt another rush of panic. What if it was still in there? What if it had drowned, but was lodged too deep to come out? There was nothing we could do except wait. My mother assured me that it must have fallen out at some point, that it wasn't in there anymore. But I never saw it. I never saw proof that it was gone. And that thought never left me. Days later, we went to the doctor. He checked my ear, peering inside with a small light. "Nothing's there," he said simply. "No bug, no remains, nothing." I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. I never got to see it leave. I never got to see what had invaded my ear, what had made its way so deep inside me. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know when it fell out or if it ever did. Maybe it broke apart inside, maybe it disintegrated, or maybe somehow it's still there, buried so deep that no one could ever find it. And even now, whenever I feel an itch by my ear, my heart skips a beat. I have to check, every single time, because I can't shake the feeling that one day, I'll hear that sound again. I used to stay at my grandma's house a lot when I was a kid. It was a small, cozy house, always warm, always smelling like something baking. I loved it there, at least when I was younger. Before my grandpa died, it was my second home, a place I felt safe. But after he passed when I was 7, something changed. Not the house itself, not my grandma, but the way I felt being there. It wasn't like I saw anything, or even that anything weird happened most of the time. But I couldn't shake this deep, gut-level feeling that something was wrong. I remember trying to explain it to my parents once, but I didn't have the words. It wasn't fear exactly, not like how you'd be afraid of the dark or of a scary movie. It was more like a waiting feeling, like something was about to happen, and I just didn't know what. And yet, I still spent nights there. My parents worked late sometimes, and my grandma didn't want to be alone so soon after losing my grandpa, so I stayed. Most nights, I'd be fine, but some nights I wasn't. I've always been a light sleeper. When I was little, I had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and just standing at the top of the stairs, staring into the dark, waiting. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. Maybe for something to move, maybe for something to come walking up the stairs. Sometimes I'd try to go into my parents' room, but if they told me to go back to bed, I'd just stand there, staring, until I got tired enough to sleep again. I was an anxious kid, and maybe that had something to do with it. But I knew the difference between an overactive imagination and reality. I remember the night it happened so clearly, like I could reach into my mind and touch it. It had been about a year since my grandpa died. I was sleeping in the usual room, the one with 2 twin beds. I was against one wall, my brother was in the other bed beside me, and on the opposite wall was the collection of dolls and crafts my grandma kept. Most of them were just decorations, but 2 of them stood out more than anything else, Raggedy and Raggedy Andy. They freaked me out. I never said anything about it, but I hated them. There was something about their eyes, the way they just sat there, limp but somehow always seeming to be watching. The fabric was old and slightly faded, but they were still bright enough to stand out in the dim light that crept in from the hallway. They never moved, they never did anything, but I hated them just the same. That night, I woke up like I often did. I felt the heaviness in my chest, that same quiet dread I always felt when I was there. I told myself I was just being paranoid, just being a kid. I needed to go to the bathroom, and even though I was old enough to go by myself, I still didn't like walking through the dark hallway alone. I decided to go wake up my grandma to see if she'd walk with me. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. The room was dim, but I could still see enough to make out the furniture, the bed beside me, the dolls on the shelf. I swung my legs over the bed, letting them touch the cool floor, and something made me look up. Raggedy Ann's arm was raised. I froze. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it had always been like that. Maybe my memory was wrong. Maybe, but I knew it hadn't been. The way her head was tilted, slightly to the side, like she was looking at me, like she was waving. I don't remember thinking. I don't remember making a decision. 1 second I was sitting there, staring, and the next I was running. I didn't care if my brother woke up. I didn't care if I made noise. I just ran straight into my grandma's room. I dove under the covers, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She stirred but didn't get up. I shook her arm, whispering, "Grandma." But she only mumbled something about it being late. She didn't get up. She didn't check. Maybe she thought I was dreaming. Maybe she just didn't want to entertain my fear. I don't blame her for it now, but at the time, it felt like the world was ending. I curled up under the covers, my back pressed against her warmth, and I stayed like that until morning. When the sun came up, I convinced myself it had been a dream. I had imagined it. I was an anxious kid, after all. It was just my brain playing tricks on me. I made myself believe that. But when I went back into the room, the doll's arm was down. Her head was straight, like nothing had ever happened. I'm 22 now. It's been 14 years. I still think about that night every time I go upstairs at my grandma's house. The doll is still there, sitting in the same spot, untouched. It's never moved again. And yet, every time I see it, I feel that same unease settle in my stomach, like something waiting just beneath the surface. My family says it was a dream, that I was half asleep, that I imagined it. And I want to believe them, I really do. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between being a scared little kid and something real. I've never told my grandma about it. I don't think she'd believe me. But every time I see that doll, I feel like it remembers me too. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The dream had been so real, so vivid, that I could still feel the weight of it pressing on my chest. In the dream, I had been lying exactly as I was now, in my bed, in my room, on this farm in the middle of nowhere. But in the dream, I had heard something, footsteps approaching my door. Slow, deliberate, moving with an eerie sense of purpose. They had stopped just outside my door. Silence followed. A heavy, suffocating silence. And then the door had started to open. The fear still clung to me as I stared up at the dark ceiling, trying to shake the feeling off. It was just a dream, but my body didn't seem to believe it. My hands were clammy. My breath was uneven. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was always quiet out here. No neighbors, no traffic, just miles and miles of fields stretching out in every direction. The nearest town a good 30-minute drive away. I rolled over and glanced at my alarm clock. 1:03 a.m. The red digits cast a dull glow over my nightstand. I exhaled slowly, forcing my muscles to relax. Nothing was out of the ordinary. I was still alone in the house, same as I had been when I'd gone to bed. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me to watch over the farm. I'd done it plenty of times before. No big deal. I shifted under the covers, trying to get comfortable again. Just a dream, I reminded myself. My eyelids grew heavy, and I started to drift. And then I heard it. A creak. My eyes snapped open. My body tensed. It had come from the direction of my bedroom door. I turned my head slowly, heart hammering. The door was closed, just as I had left it. I stared at it, waiting, straining to hear anything else. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence of the room. My fingers clenched the blanket. Maybe the house was settling. Old wooden houses made noises like that, didn't they? I'd lived here my whole life, and I knew every sound this place made. This one felt different. I swallowed hard and let out a slow breath. My mind was messing with me. The dream had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I turned onto my side, facing away from the door. Just go back to sleep. Morning would come soon enough. Another creak. This one was louder. I turned back toward the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. The air felt heavier now, thick with something I couldn't name. I stared at the door so hard my vision blurred. Then the handle moved. It was slight, barely a twitch, but I saw it. I saw it. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to do something, but my body was locked in place. Then slowly, impossibly, the door began to open. I reacted before I could think. A raw, terrified scream ripped from my throat as I threw myself out of bed and across the room. My body slammed against the door with all my weight, forcing it shut. My hands fumbled for the lock, twisting it so hard I thought the metal might snap. I stood there, pressing against the door, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. My skin felt cold, my shirt damp with sweat. My eyes darted wildly around the room. Was there someone inside the house? Had they been standing outside my door listening? I couldn't move. Couldn't think. But I had to. I forced myself to step back, keeping one shaking hand against the door, as if that alone could keep it from opening again. My fingers fumbled over the nightstand until they found the switch of my lamp. The sudden light felt blinding. I turned, scanning the room. Empty. My closet door was open, revealing nothing but hanging clothes and cluttered shelves. The window was still locked from the inside. I forced my legs to move, stumbling toward the light switch by the door. I flicked it on. The hallway outside my room was empty, stretching into darkness. I swallowed against the lump in my throat and took a shaky step forward. Then another. I needed to check the house. I needed to know if I was alone. Light after light flickered on as I made my way downstairs. My hands trembled so badly I had to grip the railing. The kitchen, the living room, the front door locked. I checked the back door. Locked. Every window. Locked. I stood in the center of the living room, heart still pounding, stomach twisted into knots. Nothing was out of place. No broken glass. No forced entry. No sign of anyone. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in the brightly lit living room with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. The hours stretched on, endless and suffocating, every tiny noise making my pulse spike. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, exhaustion had set in so deep I could barely keep my eyes open. But I couldn't shake the feeling, the heavy, lingering sense that something had been there. Something had watched me. I never found an answer. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry, no logical explanation for what happened that night. But I never slept with my door unlocked again. I still remember the way the air smelled that day. Dry dirt, hot metal from the car hood, and the faint scent of something rotting. It was the kind of stench that gets in your nostrils and stays there, even after you leave. My father had decided to take me along on one of his little investigations. He was on the borough council, always wanting to check things out for himself. Our town wasn't a town at all, just a stretch of land, some farms, some houses, a few old trailers tucked away in the woods. It wasn't the kind of place where people got involved in their neighbor's business, not unless they had to. That day, my father wanted to check on a property where there had been trouble. The police had been called out there more times than he could count, but nothing ever really came of it. Some people just lived in a way that made others uneasy. This was one of those places. We drove an old car, something we didn't care much about anymore. Something that could handle the dirt roads without my father worrying about the suspension. The road was narrow, lined with weeds that had grown too tall. Dust kicked up behind us, hanging in the still air. When we pulled up, I saw two trailers. The first one wasn't too bad. Old but maintained, like the people living there had just enough money to keep it from falling apart. The other one, though, looked like something abandoned, something no one should be living in. The metal siding was rusted, parts of it warped and peeling. Trash littered the yard, piles of broken things, a torn couch, plastic bags caught in the wind. The windows had thick sheets nailed over them, dark and unmoving. The neighbors from the better trailer came out first. A man and a woman, wary but willing to talk once my father introduced himself. I stood off to the side, only half listening. It was the same story. Every so often, they'd hear screaming. Not just arguments, not just yelling, but something raw, something desperate. The old woman who lived there, their neighbor, would cry and beg. Some nights, she screamed about her underwear, about being left alone. They knew she lived with her sons. Two men, big and mean, the kind of people you didn't make eye contact with. They carried knives and pistols on their hips, like they were waiting for an excuse to use them. The neighbors had called the cops, but nothing ever changed. The last time they called, the police had found her naked inside, lying in filth, maggots under her skin. A dog carcass had been rotting in the living room. They took her away, but the men were still there, still free. While my father kept talking, I wandered. I knew better than to go too far, but I was curious. The closer I got to the bad trailer, the worse the smell became. It wasn't just garbage. It was something deeper, something sick. A feeling crawled up my spine, but I kept going. The porch sagged under its own weight. There was a fridge sitting outside, its door shut, covered in grime. And then I saw what was on top of it. Bones. A rib cage picked clean. At first, I thought maybe it was from a deer. Hunters dumped carcasses sometimes. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. The shape of it. The way it was placed, like someone had set it there instead of throwing it away. I didn't want to think about it too much. I turned back toward my father, toward the safety of other people, but my legs felt slow, like something was holding me there, making me look longer than I should. I forced myself away, walking back, my heart beating too fast. My father was still talking, but he looked over at me, saw whatever was on my face. "Time to go," he said, like he knew something wasn't right. We got in the car, and I didn't say anything. The neighbors watched us, waiting, maybe hoping my father could do something, but we both knew there wasn't much to be done. As we pulled away, I kept my eyes forward, afraid to look back. Afraid that if I did, I'd see those men standing there, watching us leave, knowing we had been too close, knowing we had seen too much. I didn't sleep well that night. The images stuck in my head. The trailer, the bones, the smell. But it wasn't just what I had seen. It was what I knew was still out there. The men, the ones who had hurt their own mother, let her rot in filth. The ones who were still free, still living in that trailer, still carrying their knives and guns. The ones who might have seen me too. When I was 21, my cousin was getting married in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The town was old, full of history, and more importantly, full of stories. People talked about strange noises at night, about figures standing in the fog, about voices whispering in places where no one should be. I never put much thought into it. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Not really. Not until that night. The wedding itself was beautiful. The reception lasted late into the night, full of dancing, drinking, and laughter. By the time we got back to the hotel, it was close to 1 in the morning. The hotel was old, the kind of place with heavy wooden doors and long, narrow hallways where the lights were dim even when they were on. The carpet was worn in places, and the wallpaper had started peeling near the ceiling. It smelled like something antique, something left sitting too long. But it was just a hotel, just a place to sleep for the night before heading back home the next morning. I shared a room with my mom and my cousin, Matt. The room had 2 queen-sized beds, and my mom and I shared one while Matt took the other. I remember being exhausted, too tired to care about much of anything. I climbed under the covers, closed my eyes, and let sleep take over. Sometime later, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. The room was dark, the kind of dark that felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The air felt thick. I could hear my mom's breathing, deep and steady, the sound of sleep. Then I heard it, a whisper. Ma attak. It was slow, drawn out, almost careful, like whoever was saying it didn't want to be caught. My eyes were open now, but I didn't move. I just laid there, staring up at the ceiling, my heartbeat slow and heavy in my chest. Then it came again. Ma attak. The voice was soft but clear, like someone standing just at the edge of the bed. It didn't sound like my mom. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. My body felt stiff. I didn't want to turn my head. Didn't want to see anything that I wasn't ready for. I kept telling myself I was half asleep, that my mind was playing tricks on me, that it was nothing. But then I heard it again. Ma attak. That time, Matt answered. What? His voice was groggy, thick with sleep. He must have just woken up. For a moment, there was silence. Then nothing. No response. Just the quiet hum of the hotel room. The distant sound of a car outside. The wind pressing against the window. Matt shifted in his bed. Mom. No answer. I could still hear my mom's breathing, slow and steady, the rhythm of someone deep in sleep. A part of me wanted to say something, but my mouth wouldn't work. I didn't want to acknowledge what I heard. I didn't want to make it real. I closed my eyes, tried to focus on my breathing, tried to push it all away. Eventually, I fell asleep again. At around 6 in the morning, I was yanked out of sleep by the sound of my mom screaming. I bolted upright, my chest pounding, my breath caught in my throat. My mom was sitting up in bed, her hands clutching the blanket, her eyes wide and frantic. The room was still dim, the early morning light barely creeping through the curtains. What the hell? Matt muttered from his bed. My mom was shaking her head, rubbing her face like she was trying to wipe away a bad dream. I had a nightmare, she mumbled. A big spider. A wave of relief washed over me. Just a dream. Just a bad dream. Nothing more. I laid back down, trying to calm my heartbeat. Matt sat up, rubbing his face. Why were you saying my name last night? My mom blinked at him. What? Last night, Matt said, his voice a little more alert now. You were whispering my name, I didn't say anything, she said, looking confused. I was asleep. Matt looked at me then, and I could see the question in his eyes. I didn't answer. I just shook my head. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. We packed up and left the hotel not long after that. I didn't mention the voice to my mom. I didn't bring it up on the ride home. I told myself it was nothing, that we were all just tired, that our minds were playing tricks on us. But the thing is, I know what I heard. And so did Matt. Neither of us ever talked about it again. I met John in high school, and we became inseparable. We hung out at his house almost every day after school, wasting hours on video games, music, and just killing time the way teenagers do. His place wasn't anything special, a small, single-story house in an older neighborhood, the kind with narrow streets and big, looming trees that always seemed to cast shadows no matter the time of day. It was quiet, nothing about it screamed haunted or creepy, but from the very beginning, something about the place made me uneasy. At first, it was small things. I'd hear footsteps when we were the only ones home, soft but deliberate, like someone walking barefoot across the hardwood floor. I'd see quick movements out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes just outside my field of vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I brushed it off at first. The brain plays tricks, especially in a house you're not familiar with, and I didn't want to be the paranoid friend. But the more time I spent there, the harder it became to ignore. The shadows weren't just in my periphery anymore. I'd catch glimpses of them in doorways, the spaces between furniture, standing just behind me in the bathroom mirror. They didn't move like normal shadows, not like something cast by an object. They were too fluid, too independent, as if they had weight, a presence. After about a month, I finally brought it up to John. He went pale, his whole expression changing in an instant. He looked at me like I had just said something forbidden. Then he got angry. He demanded to know who told me, who had been feeding me stories. When I swore I was serious, that I wasn't joking, his anger turned to something worse, fear. He admitted he had been seeing the same things for years, but had kept it to himself, afraid that saying it out loud would make it worse. Things escalated quickly after that. We started hearing laughter when we were alone, quiet at first, like it was coming from another room. Then louder, closer. Doors would shut on their own, slowly at first, then slamming with enough force to shake the walls. The TV would turn on and off, always to static, never to a channel. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with something unseen. One afternoon, we were sitting in the kitchen, talking about what we should do. John was convinced that acknowledging it was making it worse, but I thought we should try to get rid of it somehow. I brought up the idea of a house blessing, something, anything, to push whatever it was out. The second the words left my mouth, a cardboard box from the counter launched itself at me, knocking into my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. We ran out of the house. Neither of us spoke, just stood in his driveway, breathing hard. We decided then, and there we had to do something. That night, we got our hands on some holy water from his grandmother's house and sprinkled it in every room, murmuring prayers under our breath, not sure if we were doing it right. The house felt different after that. Lighter. The air wasn't as thick, and the noises stopped. The shadows, too. It was as if we had chased whatever it was away. Months later, John came to stay with me at my family's lake house for the weekend. It was an old place, but not eerie. A place full of good memories, safe. The first night there, we both thought we saw something move in the corner of the room. A dark shape, fast, gone before we could focus on it. We laughed it off, uneasy but unwilling to feed into it. Nothing had happened since we blessed his house, and it didn't make sense for something to follow us. That night, we woke up to voices. Distant, murmuring, coming from the living room. It wasn't the TV. Everything was off. John grabbed a flashlight and went to check, thinking maybe someone had broken in. I stayed in bed, listening. A few moments later, I heard something running down the hallway, heavy footfalls fast. My chest went tight, and I bolted up, expecting to see John rushing back. But he wasn't there. He wasn't even in the house. I found him outside on the porch, pale and shaken. He had heard it too, the footsteps, but from outside. We stood there in the cold for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The voices were gone. The house was silent. We convinced ourselves we had imagined it, that maybe we were still on edge from what had happened at his place. We went back inside, locked the doors, and tried to sleep. Nothing else happened that night. A week later, I went back to the lake house alone. The place had been empty since our visit. No one had been inside. When I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The air was stale, heavy in a way it had never been before. In the hallway, a picture frame with my photo in it had been ripped off the wall, shattered glass littering the floor. And in the living room, every pillow from the couch had been stacked in a perfect tower, balanced in the exact center of the seat. I didn't sleep there that night. I locked up, left, and never went back alone again. Eventually, I stopped hanging out with John altogether. I don't know why. Maybe because I started to feel like whatever had been in his house hadn't really left. It had just followed us, waiting. Maybe it wanted me to be alone. I wasn't willing to find out. I never experienced anything like it again. Whatever it was, whatever we disturbed, it stayed behind. And I never went looking for it. In the 70s, my wife and I raised our first litter of Springer Spaniels. We had always loved the breed, their playful energy, the way they looked at you with those big, trusting eyes. When our first litter was born, we were thrilled. 8 tiny, wiggling bodies, squirming against their mother's belly, their soft whimpers filling our home. It felt like a dream come true. We had done our research. If we wanted to sell them as AKC-certified puppies, we had to dock their tails. The vet had told us it was easy. Snip them off with scissors a day or 2 after they're born, he said. They'll hardly notice, and the snip will seal off with almost no blood. I trusted him. He was a professional, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened. My wife was the first to try. She picked up one of the pups, its tiny body fitting right into the palm of her hand. I held my breath as she positioned the scissors at the base of its tail. The puppy squirmed, its pink belly exposed. Then, with a quick movement, she cut. The sound that came out of that puppy was something I'll never forget. A horrible, high-pitched yelp, like it had been hit by a car. It didn't stop either. It kept crying, writhing in her hands, and blood, so much more blood than we expected, poured from the wound. It dripped down onto my wife's fingers, onto the kitchen counter, onto the floor. The puppy thrashed, trying to crawl away, smearing blood across the towel we had laid down. I felt sick. I couldn't do it. I told her I couldn't, but she said, "I did it, so you have to." So I did. I picked up the next puppy, my hands shaking. Its body was warm, fragile. My stomach twisted into knots. I pressed the scissors against the tiny tail, hesitated, then forced myself to do it. The yelp tore through the air. It sounded just like the first one. It thrashed in my hands, blood seeping between my fingers. I set it down quickly, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt like I had done something terrible, something cruel. But we had been told this was necessary, that this was just what people did. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a bad smell. We stopped after those 2. We couldn't do any more. The rest of the puppies would keep their tails. We didn't care about the AKC rules anymore. We just couldn't do it. We cleaned up the mess, wiping the blood from the counter, the floor, our hands. The 2 injured puppies eventually stopped crying and curled up with their mother, exhausted from the ordeal. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us wanting to talk about what we had just done. Later that night, my wife checked on the litter. She counted them, touching each one gently, making sure they were all okay. Then she froze. I saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her breath caught in her throat. She counted again. Then she turned to me, her face pale. "There's another one without a tail." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "There are 3 without tails." That didn't make sense. We had only cut 2. I got up and looked for myself. I counted them, just like she had. 8 puppies in total, 3 without tails. The third one had a perfectly smooth stump where its tail should have been. There was no blood, no sign of injury. It looked just like the others we had docked, like it had been done early, like it had been healing for hours. But we hadn't done it. We checked again, retracing every step of the evening. No one else had been in the house. There was no way anyone else could have done it. We hadn't lost track. We were sure. We had only cut 2 tails. And yet there it was, a third puppy missing its tail. I felt a deep, sinking unease settle into my stomach. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe we had miscounted. Maybe, in the stress of it all, we had forgotten cutting a third one. But I knew that wasn't true. I could still feel the weight of those scissors in my hand, still hear the yelps in my ears. I remembered every second of it, and we had only done 2. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my wife. We lay awake in bed, listening to the tiny sounds of the puppies shifting in their box, their mother licking them gently. I kept replaying the night over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how I looked at it, something was wrong. Over the years, we raised more litters. I never docked another tail. I told buyers they could do it themselves if they wanted, but I wouldn't be the one to hurt another puppy like that again. And every time I saw a litter of puppies with their full wagging tails, I thought about that first night, about that third puppy. I never found an answer. I never told anyone either. Not because I was scared of being called crazy, but because I knew it wouldn't make a difference. What could anyone say? What explanation could they give? Some things just happen, and sometimes there are no answers. I never liked the dorms much. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and privacy was more of a concept than a reality. But it was college, and I had my friends, my little group. We weren't the quietest bunch, always laughing, messing around, doing stupid things just to pass the time. It was a good setup, or so I thought, until we met him. He lived on the floor above us. At first, we didn't even know he existed. But one day, he just appeared. We were being particularly loud, music playing, joking around, the usual. The door was open because it got unbearably hot in the dorms. And suddenly, there he was, standing in the doorway. He wasn't invited in, but he walked in anyway. He was a little off. Not in an obvious, scary way, but something was just off. His eyes lingered too long. His smiles never quite reached his eyes. But he was friendly, or at least he tried to be. He introduced himself, talked to us like he had always been part of the group. None of us wanted to be rude, so we let him hang out for a while. When he left, we all looked at each other, slightly confused but shrugged it off. College was full of weird people. Then he kept coming back. It wasn't long before he was trying to be with us all the time, especially when we smoked. He was persistent, almost desperate to be included. At first, we didn't mind, but the more we were around him, the stranger he seemed. The way he spoke, the way he moved, even the way he laughed, it just felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made me uncomfortable. Eventually, I decided I couldn't handle being around him anymore, especially when I was high. The paranoia would set in, and he was the last person I wanted to be near. My friends felt the same, so we started avoiding him. At first, we made excuses. Then we just stopped responding altogether. He didn't take the hint. He kept showing up, knocking on our door, waiting for us outside class. It became a game of dodging him, cutting corners, pretending we didn't hear him call our names. And then, he realized what we were doing. I don't know why, but he focused his anger on me. Not the others, just me. Maybe I was the one who ignored him the most. Maybe I was the one who made it clear I didn't want him around. Whatever the reason, I became the target. I could feel it every time he looked at me. He didn't just dislike me. He hated me. One day, I walked into my dorm room and found him sitting there with my roommate and a couple of our friends. He looked up at me, smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. I don't know how the conversation got to where it did, but when I stepped inside, he was talking about his past. He said he'd always been different, always been alone. He spoke like it was something he had accepted, but there was something bitter underneath his words. Then he said it. I'm a sadist. If I ever killed anyone, I'd torture them first. I still remember how the air felt in that room, how every noise outside faded away. No one spoke. We just stared at each other, and I could see it in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. This guy isn't joking. After he left, we reported it to the RA. Nothing happened. I don't even know if they took us seriously. Maybe they thought it was just some weird college kid trying to act edgy. Maybe they just didn't care. And then there was the door. The heat in the dorms was unbearable, and my roommates refused to sleep with the door closed. I fought them on it, but they didn't think it was a big deal. I did. Every night, I lay in bed, staring at that open doorway, listening to every little sound outside. I barely slept. I kept imagining waking up to see him standing there, watching me. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. No one knew where he went. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. His stuff was gone from his dorm. His name wasn't on the door anymore. We never saw him again. We asked around, but no one had an answer. And that was almost worse than knowing. Because even now, years later, I still think about him. I still wonder where he went, what he's doing. I wonder if he ever got over the hatred he had for me, or if he's out there somewhere, still holding on to it, still thinking about me, waiting. My roommate and I were desperate to find a new place. Our lease had been up for a month already, and we'd been overstaying, stretching our welcome as much as we could while we searched for somewhere else to live. Everything we found was too expensive, too small, too far, or gone before we even had the chance to apply. Then finally we found it, a huge, old house not far from our jobs. It needed work, but the owner was in the middle of renovations and agreed to rent it to us at a reduced rate while the work was being completed. The location was perfect, and the size was more than we could have asked for. It seemed too good to be true. The house was in rough shape. The floors were worn down and stained. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips, and the furniture left behind was dusty and outdated. Every surface was covered in grime, and the air inside smelled stale, like old wood and something faintly rotten that I couldn't quite place. The kitchen appliances were brand new, the only part of the house that had been updated so far, but everything else felt frozen in time. We spent our first afternoon hauling out furniture, scrubbing what we could, and trying to make the place livable. The owner had promised that the contractors would be coming through regularly to keep working on the house, but for now, we were living in what felt like an abandoned relic. That first night, my roommate stayed at his girlfriend's place, leaving me alone in the house. I told myself it was fine. I'd lived alone before. But the second the sun went down, the house changed. The stillness of it was overwhelming, like the walls were pressing in on me. Every creak of the settling would felt deliberate, like someone moving just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, blaming the age of the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a real, physical sensation, like eyes pressing into the back of my head no matter where I went. I went to bed early, wanting the night to be over as quickly as possible. But sleep didn't come easily. I was hot, sweating under my blanket despite the winter air outside. My skin itched, a prickling sensation spreading over me like tiny pinches. I tossed and turned, falling in and out of restless sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. An old woman, standing in the corner of my room, wearing a white nightgown that looked faded and thin. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. And each time I slipped back into sleep, she was closer. I woke up gasping when I felt something grab my ankle, yanking me from my dreams. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, but I was alone. The house was silent. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, my next-door neighbors came by to introduce themselves. They were an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for over 60 years, and they knew the history of our house well. It had been in the same family for nearly a century. The last owner, an elderly woman, had lived there most of her life. In her final years, she had been cared for by a private nurse, but the neighbors told me the nurse had neglected her, letting the house fall into disrepair while the old woman wasted away. She had died in the house, and by the time anyone realized how bad things had gotten, it was too late. My stomach turned as I remembered the massive, antique bed left in my room. The thought that she had likely died right where I had tried to sleep made my skin crawl. For the next month, strange things kept happening. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to as proof that something was wrong. Just enough to unsettle me. My roommate and I both experienced it. Mornings where we swore we heard the other moving around in the kitchen, only to find them still asleep. Objects that would go missing and turn up in odd places. My bedroom door, which led out to the back patio, would be unlocked when I came home, even though I knew I had locked it. At night, I would hear footsteps pacing back and forth on the porch, slow and deliberate. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe the lock was faulty. Maybe the sounds were just the house settling. Maybe we were just psyching each other out, making ourselves believe something was happening when it really wasn't. But there was always a feeling in the air, something we couldn't explain. It was like the house was unsettled, restless. Then, slowly, things started to change. As the contractors made progress, replacing floors, painting walls, and clearing out the old furniture, the heaviness in the house started to lift. The weird incidents stopped. No more footsteps at night, no more unlocked doors, no more strange dreams. The house, once dark and oppressive, became bright and warm. By the time the renovations were complete, it was unrecognizable. The smell of old rot was gone, replaced by fresh paint and polished wood. The house finally felt like ours. Sometimes, I think back to those first few weeks and wonder if we had just been imagining it all, letting our minds play tricks on us in an unfamiliar place. But deep down, I don't think that's the case. It was as if the house itself had been waiting for something, stuck in the past, unable to move forward. And maybe, when we finally gave it the care it had been neglected for so long, it was able to rest. I don't feel watched anymore. The air in the house is light, welcoming. The feeling of unease is gone. Whatever had been there before, whether it was just a lingering sense of history or something more, I like to believe that it has found peace, just as we have. I used to live near a graveyard. It wasn't a big deal to me. The dead never bothered me, and I liked the quiet. I would go there sometimes during the day just to get away, and at night when I wanted to be alone. Something about the place was peaceful. Most people avoided it after dark, but I never saw the harm in it. One night, I decided to do something different. I had always been a little into the paranormal, though not to the extent that I actually expected anything to happen. Just curious. I told a few of my friends that I was planning to go to the graveyard late at night to see if any spirits would respond to me. Every single one of them told me it was a bad idea. They all had the same reaction. Don't do it. Don't mess with things you don't understand. I should have listened. It was about 2:45 in the morning when I made my way to the graveyard. The night was cool, with a light breeze that made the trees rustle just enough to remind me I was alone. The place was silent aside from the wind. No cars, no people. Just me and the graves. I walked around a bit, sat in my usual spot, just enjoying the stillness. When 3 o'clock hit, I walked to the middle of the graveyard and started asking questions. Simple ones at first. Is anyone here that would like to speak? Why are you still here? If someone is here, can you give me a sign? I stood there waiting for something, anything, to happen. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't completely comfortable either. There was an edge to the air, something subtle, like the pressure had changed. For about 10 or 15 minutes, nothing happened. Just me standing there, asking questions to the night. I started getting impatient. Then I made my mistake. I tried to provoke whatever might be there. I started calling them weak, cowardly, things like that. I didn't really believe anything would respond, but part of me wanted to see if pushing would get an answer. That's when the laughter started. It was close. Too close. Maybe 10 feet ahead of me, slightly to my left. Low, guttural, like someone trying to hold back, but letting just enough out that I could hear. It wasn't just a laugh. It was something else. A sound that didn't belong, that shouldn't have been there. It was the kind of laugh that made my stomach tighten, that sent ice down my back. I didn't move at first. My mind was scrambling, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a trick of the wind, or maybe I was imagining things. But it didn't stop. It got deeper, more deliberate, as if whoever was laughing knew I was frozen. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was the kind of sound you hear from someone who enjoys hurting things. The kind of sound you'd expect to hear in a nightmare, right before something terrible happens. Then I ran. I don't remember making the decision. One moment I was standing there, the next my legs were moving. I sprinted straight for the entrance, not daring to look back. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I could still hear the laughter, floating in the air like it was following me. The distance to my house wasn't far, just a few blocks, but it felt endless. I kept running until I saw my front door. Only then did I slow down. I was safe now, I thought. I was out of the graveyard. Then, just over my shoulder, the laughter came again. Closer this time. I didn't think. I just ran inside and locked the door behind me. My heart was hammering in my chest, my lungs burning. The house was silent, normal. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed. It took a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I met up with my friends. I hadn't said a word about what happened, but the moment they saw me, one of them just shook his head and said, "You pissed something off, didn't you?" Apparently, it was obvious. I told them what happened, and they weren't surprised. They told me I shouldn't have gone, that I shouldn't have provoked anything. I didn't argue. I knew they were right. I tried to put it behind me, but the feeling never really left. A few nights later, I was walking my dog near the graveyard. I wasn't thinking about that night, wasn't expecting anything. Then I heard it again. A giggle this time, high-pitched, broken, coming from an empty hill near the graves. My dog's ears went back, his body stiff. He heard it too. I didn't wait around. We turned and walked away fast, my stomach twisting into knots. I moved out of that town eventually. But sometimes, even years later, I get the feeling that whatever was there didn't stay behind. Every now and then, I catch something, just on the edge of hearing. A sound, a feeling, the weight of something unseen watching me. It's never gone. And the worst part is, I don't think it ever will be. Let me start by saying that this happened in the house that I now live across from. My computer setup is right in front of the window, and I can see the house clearly every time I look up from my screen. It's been years since it happened, but I still think about it. I still see things. When I was 13, I spent most of my time at my best friend's house, which was right across the street. It didn't matter what time of day or night it was. His parents were close friends with my dad, so I was always welcome there. I'd walk over whenever I wanted, stay late playing video games, and sometimes spend the night. One night, around 2 in the morning, I decided to head over there. The path between our houses wasn't paved, just an open lot filled with dirt and weeds. It was the kind of lot that always looked abandoned, even though it was right in the middle of a neighborhood. As I stepped outside, the air felt different. It was colder than it should have been for that time of year, and a chill ran through me, raising the hairs on my arms. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just my imagination. But after taking a few more steps, I glanced toward the lot and froze. A figure stood there, leaning against my neighbor's fence. It wasn't moving, just a shadowy outline in the dark, barely distinguishable from the night itself. I felt my stomach tighten. My heart pounded against my ribs as I forced myself to look straight ahead, acting like I hadn't seen anything. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but after another 10 steps, I couldn't help myself. I glanced back. The silhouette was glowing now, a bright white light radiating from its form. I should have run. I should have turned around and gone back inside. But instead, I felt myself moving toward it, like something was pulling me in. My feet changed direction without me realizing it. I took one step, then another, closing the distance between us. Then I heard it, a deep, guttural laugh. It wasn't human. It wasn't a sound I had ever heard before, and it made my blood run cold. My body locked up, and the glowing figure shifted. Its shape distorted, twisting unnaturally, and I swear I saw horns pushing out from its head. Panic flooded through me. My breath caught in my throat as I turned and ran, my legs moving before my mind could even process what was happening. The dirt beneath my feet kicked up as I sprinted, and then I heard it behind me. Footsteps, heavy, fast, closing in. But when I turned to look, nothing. Just darkness. Then I faced forward again, and it was there, right in front of my friend's house, staring into his bedroom window. The same laugh echoed through the night, and I felt my body go weak. My friend was in there. I had to get inside. My friend's parents always left a garage door opener in their car, tucked under the seat. I veered off toward the driveway, yanked the car door open, and scrambled to find it. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the device, but the moment I pressed the button, I heard something behind me, panting. Footsteps growing louder. The garage door was still opening when I tried to slip under it. That's when I felt it, something grabbing me. A force, a presence. It yanked at me, or at least it felt like it did. A sharp, icy sensation wrapped around my arm, and I screamed, convinced I was about to be pulled into the dark, into whatever this thing was. Then, a flash of light. Bright, blinding, like a lightning strike, but with no sound. Just for a second, I saw something else standing in the lot. A figure, but different from the one I had seen before. I don't know why, but I felt calm when I looked at it. The panic drained from my body, just for that moment. Then I snapped out of it, hit the garage button again, and ran inside. My friend believed me. I thought he would laugh at me or call me crazy, but he didn't. He told me he had seen things in that lot for months. Shadowy figures standing just outside his window, watching. That night, as we sat in his room, we heard a sound behind us. A scratch. We turned around, and it was there. The silhouette. I knew it was the same one. I don't know how, but I just knew. It stared at us, unmoving, and we sat frozen in place, too afraid to breathe. Then it banged on the glass. We ran. We ran straight to the living room, grabbed the blankets from the couch, and buried ourselves underneath them, shaking, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Then my friend's dad walked out, rubbing his eyes, asking what was going on. We tried to explain, but he just shook his head. "It's your imagination," he said. For a while, I tried to believe him. Then, a month later, my friend called me at 2 a.m. He was crying. "There are black shapes walking around your house," he said. I jumped out of bed, ran to my dad, and told him someone was outside. He grabbed a flashlight, went out, but found nothing. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, but when I got back to my room, I saw them. 2 silhouettes, right outside my window. I ran back to the phone, but my friend wasn't on the other end anymore. Instead, I heard him screaming. He was yelling for his parents, his voice cracking with terror. Then I heard banging, loud, relentless, like someone was pounding on his door. 2 minutes later, his parents rushed in, and everything stopped. A week later, they moved out. No explanation. No goodbye. They were just gone. A month and a half after that, my dad bought their house. Said it was a great deal, a bigger place. He gave it to me as a gift when I got older. Told me I could live in it as long as I took care of it. Now I sit at my desk, looking out at my old house. The same window my friend used to stare through, watching the shadows move in the night. Every now and then, I see them too. I don't know what they are, but they're still here, watching. Earlier this year, me and my friends went exploring in the woods near my neighborhood. It wasn't the first time we'd gone out there, but this time was different. We were bored, looking for something to do, and one of my friends had heard from his older brother that there was an abandoned house deep in the trees. He said it was just a rundown shack, nothing special, but we figured it was worth checking out. It took us about an hour of walking before we found it. The house was small, old, and falling apart. The windows were shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges. A small pond sat right in front of it, still and dark, reflecting the house like a dirty mirror. There was no sign of life, no birds chirping, no bugs buzzing, just silence. That should have been the first red flag. Naturally, we decided to go inside. We had to be careful stepping over broken glass and rotting wood, but nothing seemed too weird at first. The first floor was empty except for a few old pieces of furniture that had been destroyed by time and weather. Dust and dirt covered everything. There was graffiti on the walls, but it looked like the kind of stuff kids would spray paint when they're trying to be edgy. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then we found the stairs. I'm not the bravest guy, and I was already feeling uneasy, so I stayed at the back of the group as we went up. As soon as my first friend reached the top step, a strong gust of cold wind rushed past us. The air in that house had been still the whole time, but now it felt like something had just rushed through. My friend didn't even hesitate. He bolted down the stairs, shoving past us like his life depended on it. We all followed, confused and laughing nervously, until we made it outside. He was shaking. He said he saw something. Clear people, he called them. Like outlines of people standing in the hallway upstairs. We laughed at him, told him he was seeing things, but I wasn't laughing as hard as the others. I already felt off about the whole thing. He refused to go back inside, and one of our other friends stayed outside with him. The rest of us decided to go back up, more out of curiosity than anything else. We climbed the stairs again, slower this time, ready to see what had freaked him out so bad. When I reached the top, my stomach dropped. The room wasn't empty. Dead squirrels were scattered across the floor, their bodies skinned and left in piles like someone had been collecting them. On the walls, someone had drawn symbols, pentagrams, strange writing, things I didn't understand but knew weren't good. It wasn't just graffiti. It felt deliberate, like someone had spent time here, doing things they shouldn't be doing. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. We didn't say anything when we got outside. Just stood there, looking at each other, trying to process what we had seen. Then we looked toward the trees. Our friend who had run out first was gone. We turned toward the house, and that's when I saw him. In the upstairs window, staring right at me, was the skinniest man I had ever seen. His skin was pale, almost gray, and he didn't move. He just watched us. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I felt them, like they were locked onto me. We ran. None of us stopped to look back until we were home. When we finally caught our breath, we told my parents what happened. Of course, they didn't believe us. They said it was just an abandoned house, probably some squatter living there. They told us to stay out of the woods, but that was it. We've been back a few times since then, but we never got close to the house again. We stayed on the edge of the trees, watching, trying to see if anyone was still there. The house never looked different. It just sat there, rotting, waiting. I still have nightmares about it. About the symbols, the skinned animals, the man in the window, and the shed out back, the books, the strange tubes leading into the ground. We never opened them, but I still wonder what was inside. Sometimes I think about the barbed wire fence with the spikes facing inward. Who is it meant to keep inside? I don't know what we found that day. Maybe it was just some crazy person living in the woods. Maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I'm never going back there again. I remember that night so clearly. It was late, way too late to be driving around a country we barely knew. We had just landed a couple of hours before, exhausted but excited to start our holiday. The three of us, me, Jess, and Sophie, had picked up our rental car from the airport and were ready to make our way to a holiday home that belonged to Jess's parents' friends. Jess had been there before, but she had never driven the route herself. It was supposed to be simple. A straight shot from the airport, maybe an hour's drive, and we'd be there. But things didn't go as planned. By the time we pulled out of the airport parking lot, it was probably around 2 a.m. The roads were empty, barely a soul in sight. We followed the GPS, but something felt off. Jess kept second-guessing herself, saying the directions didn't look familiar. The roads got darker, narrower, and soon we realized we had turned off way too early. Instead of a paved road leading to the holiday home, we found ourselves on a muddy back road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the blackness. The car's headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the thick trees on either side. The road beneath us was slick with mud, the tires slipping slightly as we tried to turn around. But every time Jess tried, the tires dug in a little deeper. The more she pressed the gas, the more the car struggled. We weren't stuck yet, but we were getting there. Panic started creeping in. The three of us sat in silence. The only sounds were our breathing and the hum of the engine. Jess cursed under her breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to maneuver us back onto the firmer ground. But it wasn't working. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw them. Headlights. A car was coming up behind us. I felt my stomach drop. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. The beginning of every horror movie we had ever watched. Three girls, alone, lost in a foreign country, stuck in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night. The kind of situation that never ended well. The headlights got closer. Too close. Whoever it was, they weren't slowing down. We started panicking. Sophie was whispering frantically, saying we needed to lock the doors. Jess's hands were shaking as she kept trying to turn the car around, desperate to get us out of there. The mud sucked at the tires, holding us in place. The lights behind us got brighter. The car was right there, right behind us. Then it stopped. The silence was unbearable. None of us moved. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The car door behind us opened. Someone was getting out. Footsteps on the wet ground. The sound of boots squelching in the mud. A shadow moved in the headlights. A figure approaching the driver's side of our car. Jess fumbled with the locks. Sophie was whispering, oh my God," over and over again. I could feel my breath coming in short gasps. We were trapped. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to run. Then, the figure reached our car and knocked on the window. I held my breath. Jess hesitated, her fingers hovering over the window controls. Then, she lowered it just an inch. Just enough. The man outside leaned down, and in perfect English he spoke. "You're lost." Relief hit me so fast I thought I might cry. He wasn't some faceless horror movie villain. He wasn't a threat. He was a police officer. We exhaled in unison. Jess nodded, her hands still gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "We're trying to get to the holiday home, but we took a wrong turn," she managed to say. The officer nodded, glancing at our car, the tires half buried in the mud. I figured, this road doesn't go anywhere useful. You're lucky I was patrolling this way. Lucky. That was an understatement. He didn't ask us for papers, didn't treat us like we were idiots for getting lost. He simply nodded toward his car. "I'll drive ahead. Follow me." Jess gave a shaky nod. The officer walked back to his car, and as soon as he was inside, Jess tried again. This time we managed to move. The tires groaned, but finally pulled free of the mud. The police car in front of us turned around carefully, and we followed. The whole drive back to the main road, none of us spoke. The tension in the car was still thick, but now it was mixed with a strange kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes after fear drains everything from you. After about 20 minutes, we saw the familiar road leading to the holiday home. Jess let out a breath she'd probably been holding since we first got stuck. The officer slowed down in front of the house, pulled over, and turned off his lights. We did the same. He stepped out of his car again, and we rolled down the window. "You're here," he said simply. Jess nodded, her voice still shaky. "Thank you. Really." The officer gave a small smile. "Get some rest." And with that, he got back in his car, turned around, and drove away. No dramatic goodbyes, no lectures, just simple kindness. We sat in silence for a moment, just watching his taillights disappear into the darkness. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, Sophie let out a laugh. A broken, relieved, almost hysterical laugh. That was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. We all laughed then, not because it was funny, but because we were exhausted and overwhelmed and didn't know what else to do. That night, after we dragged our suitcases inside and locked the doors behind us, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How close we had been to real danger. How easily that story could have ended differently. But it didn't, because we got lucky. Because there are good people in the world, even in the middle of the night, even in the most terrifying moments. And that's something I'll never forget. I had been driving for hours, and the road ahead of me stretched endlessly, illuminated only by the glow of my headlights and the occasional overhead street lamp. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was hypnotic, and despite the loud music blaring from the radio, my eyelids felt heavier with each passing minute. I knew I shouldn't have been driving this tired. It was dangerous. My mind was fogging over, and I had that disorienting feeling where time itself felt slippery, minutes passing in an instant while others dragged on forever. I told myself I'd pull off at the next exit, but the green signs overhead kept passing me by before I could react. The exhaustion was unbearable. I blinked, just for a second, but when I opened my eyes again, I had drifted toward the shoulder. The sudden jolt of hitting the rumble strips sent a spike of adrenaline through me. I yanked the wheel back, correcting my course, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to stop. I had no choice. I checked my mirrors, looking for any headlights in the distance, but the highway was empty. No cars, no trucks, just the black stretch of road cutting through the dark countryside. I slowed down, easing my car onto the gravel shoulder. The engine hummed softly as I shifted into park and took a deep breath. I rubbed my face, hoping to shake some of the sleepiness, but my body felt like it was shutting down against my will. Oh no, just a short nap. 20 minutes, maybe 30. I didn't need long, just enough to reset my brain before I kept going. I locked the doors out of habit and adjusted my seat, pushing it back as far as it would go. The moment I closed my eyes, sleep took over, heavy and all-consuming. Then I was awake again. Something had jolted me out of sleep, my heart slamming against my ribs, but I didn't know what. I sat up quickly, breath caught in my throat, my hands gripping the steering wheel without even realizing it. Then I saw them. People. A crowd of them. At least 20, maybe more. They were standing in a rough circle around my car, their faces barely visible in the weak glow of my interior dashboard lights. I couldn't breathe. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. They were hitting the windows, their hands slamming against the glass with force. Not gently, not tapping, hitting, palms, fists, over and over again. They were shouting, but I couldn't understand the words, the noise a jumble of voices, urgent and desperate. My body locked up, my limbs frozen as I tried to process what was happening. My first thought was that I had fallen asleep on the road, that maybe I had crashed, and this was some sort of aftermath. But no, my car was intact. The engine was still running. The radio was off. The only sound was the frantic pounding against the glass. Then I woke up. I gasped, lurching forward in my seat, my heart still hammering so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. My hands were damp with sweat, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. It was a dream, just a dream. I sucked in deep breaths, forcing air into my lungs, trying to steady the panic threatening to overwhelm me. The car was silent, the road still empty. There was no one outside, just darkness stretching in every direction. But the fear wouldn't leave me. I had never experienced something like that before. It wasn't just a nightmare. It felt wrong, too real, too immediate. The echoes of the pounding against the glass still vibrated in my bones, and my skin crawled as if I had been touched. I needed to leave. Now, I didn't bother adjusting my seat. I turned the key, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel, and floored the gas pedal. The tires spun against the gravel for a second before catching, and then I was back on the highway, my headlights cutting through the endless black. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting. What? I didn't know. But I couldn't stop looking, my paranoia keeping me on edge as the miles passed beneath me. I don't believe in supernatural things. I don't believe in ghosts or premonitions or any of that. But that dream, if it even was a dream, has stayed with me in a way I can't shake. Because deep down, a part of me has always wondered, was it just a dream? Or was someone, trying to wake me up? Trying to save me? I'll never know. When I was a freshman in high school, something happened that I still think about to this day. It wasn't something I could explain, and it wasn't something I wanted to believe, but it happened. It started with my mom's friend, Em. She had been through a lot in life. Her first husband had died of cancer, and she had a tough childhood, the kind of upbringing that leaves invisible scars. Life had never really been easy for her, but she had met someone new, someone who made her happy again. His name was B, and they were engaged. My mom was really excited to meet him. The reason they were going to meet was because of something tragic. Em's dad had been killed. He was crossing the street to go to church when a car hit him. My mom had planned to attend the funeral, not just to support Em, but also because she was finally going to meet B in person. It felt like a bittersweet occasion, the kind where sadness and hope are tangled together. The night before the funeral, I had a dream. It was one of those dreams that feels too real, where every detail sticks with you even after you wake up. It was raining, heavy rain, the kind that drowns out every other sound. I was standing there, and my grandfather was in front of me. I had never met him. He died 2 years before I was born. But in my dream, I knew it was him. He didn't say much. He just looked at me and said, "Tell your mom hello, and tell her to mention the plane crash to Em." Then, just like that, the dream ended. When I woke up, the feeling didn't go away. It stuck with me, sitting heavy in my chest. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in things like this. I didn't think about ghosts or messages from the dead. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to say something. So, right before my mom left for the funeral, I told her. I expected her to be shocked or at least interested, but she just kind of laughed it off. She thought it was a weird coincidence, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. She left for the funeral, and I stayed home. The day went on as usual, and when she came back, she didn't say much about it. The funeral had gone well. She met B. Everything seemed fine. Then, about a week later, my mom called me. I could hear something in her voice, something I couldn't place at first. It was like she was trying to hold herself together, but there was this edge to it, like she was holding back something huge. She told me that Em had just called her. He had died. He was in a private plane that crashed in Canada. Just like that, he was gone. I didn't know what to say. The words sat in my throat, but nothing came out. I didn't want it to be real, but it was. It was too much of a coincidence, too strange to ignore. I thought about the dream, about my grandfather, about the rain. I thought about the way he had told me to mention the plane crash to Em, and I thought about how I didn't. There was no way to know if it would have made a difference. Maybe it was just a strange twist of fate, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't understand. But I do know that after that, I never looked at things the same way again. Sometimes, things happen that we can't explain, and sometimes we don't want to. I was living at my grandmother's house when my dad took it over after she went into the nursing home. The house was old, full of things she had collected over the years, and always had this strange atmosphere. My grandmother was very religious, almost obsessively so. She had all these stories about demons and spirits, and she claimed she once tried to perform an exorcism on her neighbor years before. I never believed in that kind of thing. I always thought it was just old people scaring themselves with stories, making up things to justify the weirdness that came with age and an old house. The house was laid out in a way that was both open and yet felt oddly confined. The dining room and living room were the same space, connected directly to the kitchen, which then led into a small computer room. It was the kind of house that made noise, even when no one was moving. Creaking floors, settling walls, the occasional pop of wood expanding or contracting. I got used to it. I had to. It was 2010, and one night, my friends and I were hanging out in the dining room. The computer was in the next room, and we had music playing while we talked. I had a massive collection of music, about 16 gigs worth, so there was always something playing in the background. We weren't paying attention to it, just talking and laughing, the way people do when they're comfortable. At some point, though, the music stopped. No one noticed at first, because we were caught up in whatever we were saying. It wasn't until there was a brief lull in the conversation that someone mentioned it. We all turned toward the computer room, expecting to see someone had paused it, or maybe the program had crashed. No one had gone in there. The screensaver was on, the speakers silent. Then, very faintly, we started hearing something. It was the sound of footsteps, but not just any footsteps. It was the distinct sound of high heels clicking against pavement, like someone walking down an alleyway. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it, but it grew louder, more defined. The room got dead silent as we all listened. The footsteps quickened, almost like someone was running. Then, out of nowhere, there was a scream. A woman, screaming at the top of her lungs. It wasn't muffled or distorted. It was crystal clear, raw, like someone was standing right there, their voice blasting through the speakers. Just as suddenly as it started, it cut off, and the Ghostbusters theme song blared from the speakers. The sudden shift was so jarring that we jumped out of our seats. We rushed into the computer room, moving the mouse to wake up the screen. There were no open tabs, no video playing in the background. iTunes was open, but it was paused. No playlist had been selected, and I knew for a fact I didn't have the Ghostbusters theme downloaded. There was nothing, just silence after the song ended, like it had never happened at all. We stood there, not saying a word, just looking at the screen. No one knew what to do, what to say. My heart was pounding, and I could see the same unease on my friends' faces. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch, some weird autoplay error. Maybe it was malware or some hidden file we had accidentally triggered. But none of that explained the scream. None of that explained why the music had stopped in the first place, or why iTunes, which had been paused, had suddenly played something that wasn't even in my library. That house was always strange. Electronics would act up all the time. The lights would flicker, the TV would turn on by itself, the radio would switch stations randomly. I once had an alarm clock go off at full volume at 2 in the morning when the power was out. The thing wasn't even plugged in. I had thrown it in a drawer after that, but I still found it blinking at me sometimes, like it was running on nothing. My dad never seemed bothered by it. He would brush off every weird event, saying it was just old wiring, just the house settling, just a coincidence. But I could tell he didn't really believe that. There were nights when I heard him walking around the house, checking the locks, standing in the hallway, as if he was listening for something. He didn't say anything about it, but I knew he felt it too. Over time, we just learned to live with it. The computer never did anything like that again, but the uneasy feeling never left. I don't know what caused it. I don't know if my grandmother's stories had any truth to them, or if it was all just some elaborate coincidence. But I do know that night, in that house, something happened that none of us could explain. And sometimes, not having an answer is worse than anything else. Ben has always been a little different. Not in an obviously strange way. Not in a way that made people uncomfortable at first, but there was always something slightly off about him. Something that just didn't sit right with me. I noticed it before anyone else did. Maybe because of how close I was to Uncle Ben. Maybe because Ben always gravitated toward me like a magnet, sticking to my side whenever we were in the same house, same yard, same room. He didn't do that with anyone else, not even his parents. I remember the first time he ever said anything that made me pause. He was about 3 years old, just barely talking in full sentences, but he had walked right up to me, tugged on my shirt, and said, "You still have my knife?" I didn't know what to say. "What knife?" I asked, thinking maybe he had picked up one of the plastic ones from his toy kitchen set and forgotten about it. But he shook his head, this weird little grin on his face, one that looked too knowing, too sure of itself for a 3-year-old. "The one we buried," he said, "with the treasure." That was when I felt my stomach drop, a heavy weight sinking into me. There was no way he should have known that. No way at all. Uncle Ben and I had buried a little bag of junk when we were kids: plastic coins, an old switchblade, a rusted Zippo lighter with no fluid left in it, under the sand pit behind our great-grandmother's house. We had been maybe 10 or 11, playing pirates, pretending we were leaving behind some grand secret to be found years later. But no one else knew about it. Not a single person. Not even Uncle C, and he had been close with Uncle Ben too. I told Ben I didn't remember, but he just smiled, took my hand, and led me outside. We walked around the back of the house, where the sand pit still sat, though it was more weeds than sand now. He pointed down at the ground, his little finger tracing an X over the spot. "Dig," he said. I did. I don't know why, but I did. The sand and dirt were packed tight, and I had to use my hands to claw at it, breaking it up as best I could. Ben just stood there, watching me. He didn't move, didn't talk, didn't fidget like kids his age normally would. He was completely still. I hit something hard about 3 feet down. I pulled it up, and there it was, the old plastic bag, grimy with dirt but still intact. Inside, the fake gold coins, the Zippo, and the rusted switchblade sat exactly where we had left them. Ben just nodded, satisfied, and walked away like it was nothing. That was the first time. The first time I felt that creeping, uneasy feeling crawl up my spine. But it wasn't the last. After that, he started asking me things. Things about memories only Uncle Ben and I shared. Jokes we used to tell. Places we used to go. Little things, small details that no one else would have remembered because they weren't important enough to tell anyone about. But he knew them, and he only ever asked me about them. He didn't talk about them to his parents, his friends, his siblings. Just me. It got weirder when he started talking to Uncle C. We were all at my grandmother's house one afternoon, playing cards at the dining table, when Uncle C went to make some PB&J sandwiches for lunch. Ben, sitting on the floor nearby, looked up and said, "Do you still like peanut butter?" Uncle C turned around, knife in hand, eyebrows raised. "What?" Ben smiled. "You loved peanut butter when we were brothers. I still love it. Do you remember when we tried mayonnaise and peanut butter?" The whole room went silent. There were at least 10 of us sitting there, but you could have heard a pin drop. Uncle C stood frozen, staring down at Ben, his face pale, his grip tightening on the knife. It took him a few seconds to recover, and when he did, he forced out a shaky, "Yeah, I remember, buddy." I didn't know what to think. No one did. Uncle C never talked about his childhood much, not even to me. He and Uncle Ben had been close, sure, but they weren't the type to reminisce in front of the family. And I knew for a fact that no one had told Ben about the peanut butter and mayonnaise thing. That was just something between them. But he knew, and that wasn't even the worst of it. A few months later, Ben started asking about his old Rubik's Cube. His old Rubik's Cube. He bugged Uncle C about it constantly, asking where it was, when he could have it back, why it had been taken from him. The only problem? That cube had been packed away in a box for 10 years. My grandmother had given me some of Uncle Ben's old things after he died, and they had been sitting in my attic ever since. There was no way Ben should have even known about that cube, much less which box it was in and where it was sitting in the attic. But he did. The final straw came last Christmas. Ben showed up with his little backpack, grinning ear to ear. He told everyone he had a surprise for us, something from Uncle Ben. We thought it was just a kid's game, something he had made up in his head. But then he started pulling out pictures. Old pictures. Pictures from the late 90s, from when Uncle Ben was in high school. Pictures that only my grandmother had copies of. Some of them were of him and his friends. Others were of family gatherings, stupid teenage antics. Ben knew everyone in those pictures by name. He rattled off their names like they were childhood friends. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, were pictures from Uncle Ben's funeral. Except, there shouldn't have been any. No one had been allowed to take pictures at the funeral. It was some family tradition, something about it being rude to take photos at a funeral. No one had ever questioned it, and no one had ever gone against it. But there they were. And when we asked Ben where he got them, he just smiled and wouldn't say a word. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know how to process it. I keep telling myself that someone is messing with us, that someone is feeding Ben this information to screw with us. There are people in my family who are just that petty, just that mean-spirited, but there's no evidence to back that up. I keep trying to push it to the back of my mind, to file it away somewhere, but I can't. It's sitting there, taking up space, waiting for me to figure it out. And I don't think I ever will.